Yeah.
So we are now recording. The forum will be recorded, and the recording will be posted on YouTube and the Shelter Forum website. So just to be clear with everyone, we're not operating confidentially or under Chatham House rule. Few things of etiquette. Please can everyone mute your microphones when not speaking, and if you can, it's not compulsory, but if you can, please do turn on your camera if you're speaking, because it's much easier for people to follow. And in discussion sessions and in the chat, if you're asking questions, please introduce yourself before you speak or type a question. We won't have, let me go on to the next slide. The 2 days of the forum will be facilitated by me. I'm Tom Newby. I used to work with CARE. I'm currently working as an engineer with Bureau Hubble, and Amelia Rule from the CARE International Shelter team. So thank you to both those organisations for supporting us with their time. Please can you mute your microphones when at all times. Sorry, I've said this already. That's good. The key thing is most sessions will not have any time allocated for questions. Instead, please type any questions you have in the chat. All the speakers have been asked to check the chat after their presentations and answer any questions in the chat. Last time we did this, there was quite a vibrant discussion going on in the chat during the day, so hopefully the same will happen here. And finally, if you're having any technical difficulties, the first thing you should do is log off and log back on again. That usually fixes everything, but if that doesn't work, you can send a private message on Zoom to Step Heiselden from CARE, and he will try and help if he can. We might not be able to fix, I'm afraid. So next slide. Tomorrow, before we get into the agenda, I wanted to remind everyone that tomorrow we have quite an exciting opportunity to hear from Dr. Chandra Shresha, who has been an executive committee member of the National Reconstruction Authority in Nepal since 2016. As many of you will know, the authority was established in 2015 to lead the national recovery and reconstruction following the earthquakes in 2015. He'll be talking about the NRA's experience of the retrofitting of private housing and the way forward from that. And as a bit of background, out of a total stock of 6 million, more than 3.5 million houses in Nepal are not earthquake resilient. The National Reconstruction Authority supported the reconstruction of about 800,000 houses to adopt earthquake-resistant technology, but of the 70,000 or so cases identified as suitable for retrofitting, only a fewer than 1,000 households actually applied for that funding. So from the perspective of implementation, it wasn't very successful, but the NRA has been looking into why this is and believes retrofitting really can be a viable approach for earthquake resilient housing. And the government of Nepal is planning to launch a nationwide retrofitting program in the future, which will pave the way for a resilient Nepal. So do join us at 11 AM BST tomorrow to hear Dr. Chandra Shresha's thoughts on the work of the NRA and the future plans. Go on to the agenda. Just before I talk about the agenda, I just wanted to say we may in some of the sessions talk about a few sensitive topics, so please be thoughtful and kind with what you say or type in the chat. And I want to remind everyone that after the forum tomorrow, we'll have 3 online venues set up for socialising and informal chat. Hopefully anyone who fancies hanging around for a bit and talking to people informally, you can pick one of those venues or switch between them if you want to do a virtual pub crawl and see who there is to have a chat with. The venues are going to be called the Lord's Gym Pub, the Black Dog Pub and O Brasileiro. Some of you will have been to those real venues in real life at some point. If you want to catch up with someone in particular, feel free to arrange which one to meet in. With that, let me talk about the agenda. We're really excited by the lineup of this forum. We've got a whole range of really interesting and thought-provoking talks and discussions. We will have some breaks during the day, as we always used to in face-to-face shelter forums. so you can get a drink, have a snack, check your emails, etc. Please, can I remind all speakers to keep to time, please? We have a very packed agenda and we need to keep things on track, and I will have to interrupt anyone who goes over their time and ask them to wrap up. So let's try and avoid that. And finally, before we move into our, actually, let me quickly run through the agenda. We've got the first session, a panel discussion on women's experiences in the shelter sector. I will leave it to Laura to give you more information on what that is in a moment. Then we have 2 sessions of presentations, 1 hour, which is more, has a few updates from sector organisations and some additional presentations, and then some more presentations after the break, and we'll wrap up at 5 o'clock before we reconvene again tomorrow. So the last thing I want to say on the agenda is, as many of you will have seen if you were signed up to our emails early on, we noted after our initial call for proposals that we were receiving no proposals from women. And after some discussion, we decided to send out a specific request for more proposals from women and for more women presenters. And I'm really pleased to say this resulted in the most gender balanced UK Shelter Forum we've ever had. We'll have at least as many women speaking as men. And it was great to see that also in the proposals being put forward, there was a clear focus on women working in the sector and how the sector addresses women's needs. So that will be, although we didn't have a theme, we've kind of landed on a bit of a theme in many of the sessions here, and I think it's going to make for a different and improved Shelter Forum. So with that, it's time to start our first session, and I want to hand over to Laura Haycoop for the session on, oh no, I don't, apologies everyone. There's one quick announcement first from Jamie. Jamie, are you on? Otherwise we can do this tomorrow morning. But are you online, Jamie? From CRS? It doesn't look like it. Well, I'll make the announcement. The shelter, the BRE Humanitarian, there's a shelter that was built at a previous Shelter Forum at the BRE. There's information at this link on what it was. It's looking for a new home. The structure and the displays which are in it, it's flat pack and it's free to a good home. So if anyone is looking for a transitional stroke emergency shelter, please get in touch with Jamie from CRS. And apologies, with that, we can go over to Laura and the Women in Shelter panel discussion.
Great, thanks, Tom. I think Amelia will share her screen in a moment. But to kick off then, so hi everyone. It's a real pleasure to be kicking off the UK Shelter Forum with this session. We have an hour, and in this hour, what we'd like to do is to start a conversation about women's experiences of working in the shelter sector. So we're going to take about 15 minutes or so for introductions and to present some of the findings of a recent survey, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. And then we're going to have about 40-45 minutes for a panel discussion. So there's 6 of us involved in this session. So we'll start out by introducing ourselves. I should say also, although we're all working for different organisations, we're all taking part in this session today with sort of independent hats on. So just representing ourselves rather than our respective organisations. But I think then if we start with a quick round of introductions, we could just go in the order that we're written there on the slides. So if you each sort of switch on your cameras and say hello. So I'll go first. So my name's Laura Haycoop. I'm an urban planner. I've been working in and out of the shelter sector for the last 12 years or so, currently working for IOM based in Geneva. Jude, do you want to go next?
Hey everyone, this is Jude Kayali. I am a Syrian working for the Syrian crisis for the last 5 years. I'm based in Turkey, Gaziantep. I am a mother and an architect, and I am a wash and shelter project manager with Care International. Thank you.
Thanks, Jude. Sadia?
Hi everyone, my name is Sadia Khan. I am an architect and an urban planner, and I've been working in the shelter sector on the humanitarian side since 10 years, and before that I've been working in the private sector and the development sector.
Great. And Shada?
Hi, everyone. My name is Shada Qahush. I am the Shelter Program Development Manager in NRC Myanmar. Thank you.
Thank you. And Amelia?
Hi there, I'm Amelia Rule. I'm the Senior Shelter Advisor at Care International, and I've been working in the sector for 11 years. Nice to meet you.
Thanks. And Eva?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Eva. I am an Spanish architect, and I have been working in the humanitarian sector, in the shelter and WASH sector for the past 5-6 years, and also involved in some development projects. Happy to be here.
Great, thank you. And so Amelia and I will be doing a bit of a double act with the facilitation in this session. So to give a bit of a background then, this all came about through a WhatsApp group, which is called the Awesome Shelter Women WhatsApp group, which has been building a fair bit of momentum over the last few months. So what started out as a WhatsApp group between a few friends since January has expanded from 6 women to 180 women. And it involves women working all over the world, working for a whole range of different organizations. And essentially the group offers a space for support, for solidarity, for exchange. It's a very new and informal group, which is exciting as it could develop in a whole range of different ways over sort of the months and years to come. And there's also now a LinkedIn group. So the LinkedIn group is called Women in Shelter. And yeah, so if you are a woman working in the shelter sector or very closely related to the shelter sector and you're not yet part of these groups, then you are very welcome to join. So in terms of the survey then, the idea of doing a survey came about essentially through wanting to get a bit of a sort of better understanding of experiences of women working in the sector, to see what trends there might be, and to identify key potential actions and areas of advocacy. The survey went live a few weeks ago and closed just last week, and we had 167 responses in total. So yeah, which was fantastic. So just a couple of things to note up front. So first of all, the scope of the survey was really quite broad. There's a lot of different areas that it touches upon, and so in a lot of ways it's just sort of beginning to scratch the surface. Secondly, important to note that the survey and the survey findings don't pretend to represent all women in the sector. So 167 responses is a lot, but it's also not a lot. And so there's clear gaps in reach and limitations. And yeah, I mean, the survey was only conducted in English, for example, which was one limitation. And essentially, it's been developed, in people's spare time and on zero budget. So there's, some caveats around limitations there. Also important to note that although, amongst respondents, what we have in common is that we're all women and we're all working in the shelter sector. But obviously women are not a homogenous group. And so in reflecting on the survey findings, it's obviously important to be conscious of intersectionality and the diversity of experiences, the diversity of backgrounds, and recognise, for example, that the experiences of women of colour may differ from those of white women, for example, and experiences of national staff may differ from international staff. Yeah, so just important to note. And then just finally to say, but this survey is sort of unapologetically focused on women's experiences in the shelter sector, but at the same time, it doesn't assume that all issues raised are unique to the shelter sector, and also doesn't assume that challenges raised are only faced by women. So what the survey does do then is it offers a starting point in understanding women's experiences in the sector. It starts to build an evidence base, and it opens up a conversation. So there will be a report coming out, but we'll need a bit of time to work on that, to pull it together. The report will go into the survey findings in a lot more detail. But for now, we're just going to share a few of the sort of top level findings to help to frame the discussion. So over to you, Amelia.
Okay, we collected quite a lot of background information about the different people the different women who have filled out the survey. And we started with mapping which countries people are currently based in. And then we went on to identifying countries of origin. As you can see, we have a wide global spread and representation. There is a concentration in Europe and the Middle East. We also went on to mapping the types of organizations that respondents have worked for during their shelter career. So this will also capture when people have changed between different organizations. We captured if respondents had experience of working at international or national staff members or both. I'm not going to explain all of the graphs because I'm hoping that they're self-explanatory. And we started to focus in on issue of gender and gender balance within the shelter sector. So as you can see here, basically we asked for what percentage of time have you had a female line manager? And you can see that for 0% of the time, that was the most commonly answered questions. The most commonly answered option, with 23 respondents saying that they've never had a shelter manager who was female. And I just want you to think about that in the context that frequently, the majority of the people that we serve are women. Going further into the gender balance of shelter teams, we looked at the senior management level where the decision making is often made, and the community facing shelter team as well. And as you can see demonstrated in these pie charts, 60 to 75% of these positions are all held by men. Our next question looked at the impacts of having women in shelter teams. So you can see that 63% of respondents said they had experienced a positive impact on shelter programming when there was a good representation of women on the team. You can also see on the right here some quotes from the open-ended questions that we included in the survey. Give you some time to read those. So the positive impacts there was a long list, but these included more inclusive programming approaches, increased access to women in the community, so better reach, better feedback from women, a broader and more detailed understanding of what the needs were, better data. It was more likely that women themselves were involved in the projects and the activities and included in actions such as training and cash for work. Gender and protection and inclusion was mainstreamed and often prioritized more because there were female staff members. And there was also better team morale, efficiency, and more support between co-workers themselves. This also led to less discriminatory behavior within shelter teams and less sexism. I'll pass over to Laura for the next bit.
Thanks. So there was a whole section also within the survey that focused on gender discrimination and threatening behaviour and sexual harassment and bullying and victimisation. In the survey, this went into a lot more detail with a number of follow-up questions, but some of the sort of the top line statistics you can see there. So while working in the shelter sector, 55% of respondents responded that they have experienced gender discrimination, 36% have experienced threatening behaviour, 30% have experienced sexual harassment, 42% have experienced bullying or non-sexual harassment, and 16% reported experiencing victimisation. I just want to say that we recognise that that some of the questions that were raised within the survey were very difficult to answer and involved revisiting negative experiences and traumas. So we're especially appreciative for respondents for putting time and emotional energy into responding to the survey. I won't go into depth on these points now, as we don't have time, but I will just focus a little bit more deeply on the gender discrimination point. If you want to go to the next slide, Amelia. In the survey, there was a question, a follow-up question on gender discrimination to try to break down the sort of the forms of gender discrimination that people had experienced. And so you can see on the graph there sort of how this was categorized and how frequently those aspects were mentioned. I'll let you read through that by yourselves, but just to add that some additional points that were raised were saying that that a lot of these are not one-off incidents, but continuous or ongoing. And another point that was raised that sort of cross-cutting across a number of these different strands was a lot of people commenting that they feel that they have to prove themselves again and again and again. So not just once, but sort of repeatedly, and how exhausting that can be. There were a number of comments that related to who discrimination was coming from. So from a number of different groups, and colleagues were mostly mentioned. But also discrimination coming from other groups, so from government counterparts, from partner organisations, from local construction workers, from community members, and mostly this was from men, but sometimes also from women. And there were comments also highlighting the intersectional nature of discrimination, so with respect to race and ethnicity and age, for example. Next slide, please, Amelia. There was a whole other section in the survey that focused on a series of questions around people's experiences of thinking about starting a family while working in the shelter sector, and also questions around caring responsibilities. Like all sections, there's a lot to unpack here, and there'll be a lot more in the report. I won't speak to each of these quotes, but hopefully you can read through some of them as I speak. So on the question of thinking about starting a family, for example, there was a whole range of responses. Some of the top trends in responses that were raised were concerns that starting a family would mean needing to completely change the type of role in the sector or leave the sector altogether. A lot of comments about the difficulty of balancing work life and family life, and many comments also about sort of risking limiting career progression. And one point that I'd like to pull out specifically here is that the statistic that you can see there in blue on the slide, that 58% of respondents who are parents or guardians said that they have faced job insecurity due to pregnancy or caring responsibilities. And in the comments related to this, one of the things that was highlighted was around the issues caused by short-term contracts and the lack of job security that they offer. So in the quote on the bottom left there, you can see, for example, where it says, fixed-term contracts are often 1 year length, which, considering a 9-month pregnancy, leaves no room for any job security during or after delivery. And being a fixed-term contract, the employer has the right to not offer another contract. But so I'll leave it there on that slide. So if you go to the next one, Amelia. And then throughout the survey, there were a number of other challenges that were raised in relation to being women working in the sector, quite a lot of practical ones. So some points around lack of access to toilets and latrines in some contexts, for example, which can have knock-on health and safety impacts. There were comments on personal safety and potential GBV risks, especially related to accommodation and travel, for example. There were some comments on privacy. And there were also challenges raised related to working in different cultures where there may be specific norms or assumptions about the roles of women. And while this is obviously part of the job, navigating this can still be challenging. So next slide, Amelia. And then, so the last section in the survey was focused on sort of moving forward. So moving forward in terms of looking at what's already being done to address gender equity in the sector, what more needs to be done, what priority actions are needed, and also asking women for ideas of how the Women in Shelter group could develop. So I won't go into this in any detail now, as I think a lot of this will hopefully come out as we start the discussion. But I will just highlight this one question that's highlighted on the slide here. So we asked whether women thought that current policies and initiatives to improve gender equity within their organisation are sufficient, and only 20% of respondents agreed or strongly agreed. So I'll leave it there, and I think we can move on to the discussion. So Amelia, back over to you.
Hi. Well, I hope that that's given everybody some food for thought. What we're going to do now is we're going to open up a panel discussion with Sadia, Eva, Jude and Shada. And I will do my best to facilitate, but I'm sure it will be a beautiful flow of natural discussion. So I think, for the first topic to consider, perhaps we could just start with some of the panel's reflections on these findings. And it would be nice maybe if we could kick off perhaps with Sadia and then go from there and work between each person in the panel. Thanks, Sadia.
Sure, thanks Amelia and Laura for this great presentation and putting all this together. Where to start? We're 2021 and we are in the shelter sector, and it's high time, and you can see it from these results, that it's high time to actually kind of take that problem at heart and work around more inclusive policies in our organizations. I'll illustrate with an example. So as I mentioned in the introduction, I started to work with the shelter sector from the humanitarian side about 10 years ago. And before that, I was in the private sector working in Belgium. In the construction, I was working as an architect and an engineer. And when I entered the humanitarian shelter sector, there was this very reputable organization I wanted to work for, a European organization. And this is a genuine and recurrent conversation I had with their HR management, who said, he was a man, a white man, who told me, you know what, you've got a great profile, but we hire 95% for our staff, we hire from the global south. I was utterly confused by his response, because I thought two things actually came to mind. One, the global south is not a homogeneous blob of people. And two, I'm a woman of color, working in a predominantly male environment, in a predominantly white country. So, and so I was utterly confused by that response. And that was is a recurrent thing that happened a few times afterward as well. And I thought, and now reflecting again on these results, I thought we have to do away with these, what I would call lazy HR policies or archaic HR policies, and really look at the complexity of our teams, and thanks goodness that there's that diversity, because there's no doubt that diversity is a strength. And how do we do that? Some good examples, though, that I've seen is that certain organizations, while working on these HR policies, include people, and so different women of color, and other maybe minority groups sit at the table and discuss the policies together. And what comes out of that as a product, as a policy, is much more inclusive and equitable. And those policies can not only be focused on how you hire and the panels, those are very important things, and how job descriptions are made. These again are very important parts, but equally focused on how there is actually space created for women. Because once you're hired, the battle is not won. As was mentioned a couple of times in the survey, you need to prove yourself again and again and again. And unfortunately, it doesn't get easier when you get in senior management positions, on the contrary. So creating that space is equally part of that whole process. I'll stop here and pass on. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sadia. And I think you also touched there a little bit on, what the ways forward are and how we can work a little bit more towards gender equity in the sector, and I hope we can explore that perhaps in more detail as well after we've reflected more with the other panelists on their reactions to the survey. So Jude, are you happy to respond? And also, like, between panelists, feel free to make it a flowing discussion and interject if you would like to, or support each other in any comments that are made that you agree with. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Emilia. Actually, the survey or the result weren't really shocking for me. We know it, we knew it since like the beginning. We knew there is a gap, a huge gap in our field. It's not only in the humanitarian field, it's everywhere. So I start working as an architect in Syria, then I moved to Algeria, Turkey, and now I am in the humanitarian field, and I still feel there is a kind of undermining your experience, your knowledge, your contribution. In every meeting, in every single meeting, I need to prove myself that, look, my point of view is valid. You might not like it, we might not agree on it, but you should, or we should consider it. I might be wrong. I'm not sure. I'm not like 100% making a right decision. No one can be sure that 100% you are right. But sitting in every meeting or in every context, trying to prove yourself that I have a way of thinking that it should be considered on our programming, on our daily life, on our decision, it's something tiring actually, and it's consume you. And even I remember, like, I had my APAA with my supervisor, which is a male, and he said, Jude, you are really good, but you need to watch your tone while you are talking. Like, you should not be very aggressive. You should listen, you should be open-minded, etc. And I told him, like, actually, I am a woman, and it's a challenge, and I need the person on the front of me to take me serious. And sometimes I'm acting this way, which I don't like. I don't agree with this, but I have to. And I'm still like looking for a decent way, or let's say a way of proving yourself in a most professional way without really being strict or showing that I know everything. So take me serious. But yeah, this survey told us, let's say, what we knew, form it. And now I think that and we need to expand more. We need to reach more people, more women on this. Even we might need to hear from men about their perspective on this. Then we pointed out the gap, and let's see what we can do more. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Eva or Shada, would you like to follow up? Lots of interesting things to pick up on there.
Thanks. Yeah, well, as Sadia and Jod said, the results were, we knew that this was gonna come up, but still it's shocking to see the percentages and to see also the experiences. And while during the introduction, it was explained how this group was born and how supportive this platform is. And I think that what I am really, really happy to see this happening now, because it is not just because we can show it here now and we are all together and you can be engaged on this also, which we are on it, I think, but we are doing our best. It's also this platform that has been born maybe 3 months ago. Is a platform, a supportive platform that I have never seen in my life. I don't know if in the humanitarian sector there is a type of supportive mechanism established like this one. This is a safe place where you can express how you are feeling. Even filling this survey was, as Amelia said, it was extremely, or Laura, I don't know who mentioned during the presentation, it was extremely hard for us to feel that. And after completing the survey, you were feeling really drowned because you need to go through all the experiences on your life. And we have experienced similar from what Sadia has explained and what Jod have explained. I can also share some examples. And also I was laughing when Jod was mentioning about the comment of you need to be, you are good, but you need to be more polite. Is how what person can support during your work when you are every day in a hard environment going to meetings, pushing for things to happen, and people are not looking at you in the meeting. You are asking something or you are pointing something, and the people don't look at your eyes because they look at the man that is sitting next to you. There is a point where, of course, it's like you scream and you say, please look at me. So we can maybe after with all the panelists share more experiences, but I think that also this is a great opportunity for share with all of you our situation and encourage more women to share, but of course to encourage men and you colleagues to engage on this, to support us during this process, because you know and you see, but maybe we didn't explain all of our feelings because sometimes also some of them are quite taboo. So it's hard to explain that, but now we have removed our mask and open all our feelings and share it with you. So I'm very hopeful for this to be the beginning and an inflection point for something better. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Eva.
Emilia, can I add on Eva? Actually, this is a group that made or give me this space where I can be woman, proudly a woman, and I can share my concerns, my issues, my dreams. It's like, do you have any position so I can apply to? It gives us a kind of comforting space, which is very unusual. Despite all our differences, I might sit, for example, with Eva in any meeting, and we won't like each other, so we don't need to meet again, and we don't build this relationship in the future. But with this group, there is only two common things: being a woman and the shelter in the shelter field, without considering any of the other differences. And this is very special and unique, actually. I never been in such a place before, or such a platform, let's say.
Yeah, a virtual space. Shada, would you like to add?
Yeah, I mean, Jude said that we know this is happening, and I think we all do, but it was still surprising to me seeing the numbers, you know, in front of the statements. And I think for me, the most shocking one at this point was, or the initial shock was, particularly for community-facing teams. I mean, how many of us sit in, you know, writing every day, gender balanced teams, and then now we see that it's not actually the case. And I for me, that was shocking, because particularly that statement of housing is a woman's issue. And, you know, in the introduction, you said most of our beneficiaries are female. I mean, that is such a red flag in a way, I would say. But just echoing also then what Eva and Jude were saying, we all have felt this. We've all gone through different challenges. But I don't think in my entire career I've ever spoken to someone about it. And it was, you know, seeing this conversation start, it's really interesting. And I think it's going to be very interesting how we take that forward. But yeah, no, I mean, it's a great initiative, and it's good to see the different challenges that people have faced and how they are overcoming them as well. Yeah, that's it from my side.
Yeah, I would like to echo that, that we, you know, I think Laura explained the group started, or the WhatsApp group started as a smaller group, and then as we started to discuss topics that we realized were very important and in line with a lot of feeling in the sector, that we wanted to widen that discussion. But the sheer amount of, or the number of women working in our sector that joined the group within, let's say, 10 days was astounding to us. And I think what was, you know, really important to me was that we might think that there's not that many women working in shelter, but then when we proactively reach out and create this space, we see that we are there, and so perhaps it's more about our representation and our voice. But I think certainly no one, I think lots of people have said that, you know, no one's ever asked these kind of questions ever before. So, you know, it's a great starting point. Right. Over to somebody else.
Yeah, actually, Emilia, you're right. Filling the survey was a bit painful for me because you need to go through all, as Eva said, all your experience. And in addition to being underestimated, although there is a lot who supported you, and like feeling blessed to have someone supporting you actually in the work field, in your family, with your family, etc., is something to consider. It's like, do men feel blessed because their manager is understanding your challenges, your daily challenges, for example? But this is a feeling I'm having every day. So it's like, thank God I'm working in a very like a healthy environment, that I can raise my complaints if there is any. Being a mother working in COVID with my child in the house, and my supervisor is always like understandable if I answer the email late. But at the end of the night, I ended up in my bed asking myself, am I a good mother? Am I a good manager? Am I a good wife? Did I do my best? Did I did this right or wrong? And then like all the pressure coming again and again to you. And then like, thank God my husband is very open-minded, and my family is very supportive, and my team is very there for me. But it's a lot. It's a lot to carry on. It's a lot of burden on you, and always you are judged. So I am late on my decision because I'm woman. It wasn't really a right decision because I'm woman. But I am a human. I might make mistakes. I might be good. I might be wrong. But it's not because I am a woman. It's because I'm a human. You know. So, yeah, this is the daily challenge. Personally, I'm facing. But there is a lot to be done. I think so.
And if I can jump here and add something also. So here we are always talking about special needs. And here in some of the comments, in some of the conclusions during the questionnaire, you can see, for example, and these are the taboo topics that I really think that we need to bring into the table also. Like, for example, are you realizing that, for example, in me personally, I have been in the field, and for 3 months I wasn't not going to the toilet during the day, not drinking water in the desert, because there was no toilet in the area. For 3 months I needed to carry this reconstruction project. There was no man, no tree, and it was a conflict area, so I needed to be with escort, and I wasn't feeling safe if I needed to go to the toilet with an escort who didn't speak actually the official language. So, and all these challenges, of course, as I was surprised to see that it is so common, and that there are urinary infections. That urinary infections are super common for the women working in the shelter sector, but these are never told because it's a taboo. And if we have our period, we also have special needs, and we are. And actually, if you are passionate about your work, and me, I have been in hard duty stations for a long time, and I remember also. I even questioned myself, but I remember at the beginning of my career, at some moment I was going to an interview with a great organization, and the process was super long. The process was it was taking months, and I needed to fight for the final process. I need to move to the other country to do all the interviews. All was clear with HR, everything, and then it comes to the technical part. and no technical question was addressed. There was no technical question. It was just, I think if it was not asked 5 times, it was 10. Are you sure that you will be okay in the bush? Are you sure that you will be okay in the bush? And then I was like, once that I have been, and I was already, I had already, at that moment, I had already experience in the bush. And then after facing all these challenges, it's like, well, that's true that it is challenging for us. But this interview, the technical interview, was carried by 2 men, and they never, of course, the way that you feel at that moment, you have gone through all the process, you are committed, you really want to go there, you really want to do this job, and you have demonstrated that. But the way that these are not considered and these are not encouraged, we want gender equality, but how you want to achieve that. And also, if yes, we want to be in the bush, but we also need we need empathy, and also in the sector to understand that we have special needs, and maybe support from at that moment, maybe some support from our men colleagues will help. But it's at least it was the opposite at that moment with the recruitment team. That was at that time, it was in that moment, it was a men team. So it's really challenging, and I think that most probably these topics are, if we don't tell you, you will not think about it. And so I think that it's important also to bring it up.
Can I jump in here just with and I just also want to acknowledge all the experiences shared in the chat box, and reading them, whether that's Liz and others that I've shared just now, reading them, every time you have a flashback. Every time you're like, oh yes, that moment in the camp when there was no place to go, that 3 hours, what happened, you know? And I wondered a lot about this. Also, myself being in a managing position, is that our managers, our team managers, are not equipped to deal with dynamics and certain dynamics around gender. And with the best of wills, when Jude was talking, I was thinking that I never went to a manager and explained, never, that there was an issue. I've never ever did that. I did it once, actually. And that was because I had a manager and she was a woman. And this was an interesting example because this was a coordination meeting. And I was in the country for a couple of weeks. And I realized that I wasn't saying much in meetings because I was just taking everything in. But I realized that the women were shut down every time in the meeting, quite aggressively. Every time there was an idea, they were just shut down. And I thought, I'm new, I'm not understanding this dynamic, let's just wait. Until 2 women came to me and said, thanks goodness you're here, because now we're going to be stronger together. I didn't know what to say. I had no idea how to deal with it. So I said, great, this time I have a woman manager, so I will ask her, she will know. And I went to her and I said, do you notice that, you know, this is how, and then my next, before I could ask the question of how could we potentially, you know, change this dynamic or do something else, she just said, oh, you know, every woman has to deal with it. I had the same in Bangladesh. And that was the end of our discussion. And otherwise, very nice woman, by the way. But I realized that it wasn't ill will. She was actually not equipped, and I was not equipped, being a woman, to deal with this situation. So I feel like it's not by a diversity training that you can get there. There needs to be targeted things to equip the managers better around these issues.
Following on Shadia, actually, it's not only giving a space to women to apply or to hire one woman in the working space. Actually, it's to make this space able to accommodate the woman needs. It's not only that there is a woman in here attending the meeting. It's giving her a space to talk, giving her a time to go and take care more of her children, giving her a room to breastfeeding her children, for example. I asked in my recent job a lot to have this child-friendly space that I can bring my child and take care of him while I'm doing my job. It's an extra load on me, I know that. It's 100% on me because no one will take care of the child. If you send him to the daycare, there is someone taking care of him, but I want to be there with my son. I want him to see me working. I want him to see me, to see what I'm doing. And yes, they heard me, they tried their best, but the regulation, the state regulation, the Sigorta regulation did not allow that. So it's not the work only, it's everything. The gap is really, the problem is really big, and to solve it, there is a lot to work on. I need a space to cry in my work. I don't know if you have this feeling under the pressure. It's like, if I want a room to go and just to cry it out. And I remember a friend of mine was crying, and her boss came in and he saw her crying. And he said, what's the problem? I'm like, I didn't get this job, blah, blah, blah. I didn't do it well. And he said, yeah, I know now why I don't hire women, because they cry a lot. And I was like, no way. It's like, crying is a healthy way of expressing yourself. Let me cry. What do you care? It's me crying. Why I should be judged? Why I should be always strong and like up to everything? I'm weak. I make mistake. I'm a woman, and I'm proud of being a woman. And I'm really, like, again, I want to make a change, and I know the change will start with my son. Anything else is just like we are playing with it, modifying it. Our mentality, there is like, I know, because I know that it's in my brain, because my mother raised me this way, that my community raised me this way. There is a lot there, and we need to unpack them slowly. But my son is my hope. He will be able to automatically, without thinking, appreciate and understand the special need of women. Yeah.
So powerful, Jude. And I think you're also reflecting a couple of the comments in the chat there as well about, you know, this also being built in internally within us as women, that we don't necessarily even recognize a situation where we are being discriminated against. Yeah, I'm quite overwhelmed.
Yeah, I also feel that what Jude said, I don't know if that there was a video, a viral video last year. I think it was about, I don't remember the name of the actress, but it was about you need to be like, we are asking our society to be a woman, like, you cannot chat, you cannot scream, you need to wear nice, you need to blah blah blah, to do this, and then in the humanitarian system, because of all this, at least in my personal experience, because of all these challenges that your voice is not listened, etc. In my personal experience, I need to block my femininity at some point. I remember I was dressing the most darkest way, the most serious way that I could, so the people will take me seriously. And I cannot wear colors, or I cannot wear like girly, because I will not be considered. I need to, and then of course, in the other side, you receive the complaints, and here we come to the other side of colleagues or men in the field saying, oh, why don't you wear in the other clothes? Why don't you dress nicely? Why don't you are more women? And all these inappropriate comments also at some point. So we are I think that until the moment, and I think that most probably all women feel that, experience that feeling, until the moment that you feel enough secure and proud, you say, I'm a woman, I'm proud to be a woman, and I will be myself, and I will behave in the way that I need to behave, and I will feel good with my own identity, because we need to block our identity, and also align with this, and with Jod was mentioning about crying, that you need to cry sometimes, you are overwhelmed. Also, we have hormones, as everyone has, and sometimes you want to cry, but you cannot, and then we become machines. And in the humanitarian sector, this is very common, not just for women, to become machines, not to feel, because we need to protect ourselves, and not to express anything, because you need to be hard and efficient and and you cannot feel. And we are humanitarian. We are human. We are working with humans. We need to connect with humans. And then also from this, I will connect with a comment that I saw in the chat box about when I was mentioning the issue of the toilets. How, if I feel like that, how will the female beneficiaries will feel? And that's totally right. And that's the positive, one of the positive impacts of having women in the sector is that if the majority of our targeted populations are women, the most vulnerable are women. When you are a woman, and me, I have experienced this working both in the shelter and the WASH sector, sometimes women will not talk with men, and they will not tell you what they really need. And I really needed to have, you can have focus group discussions separated with a man, but also I always ask for a private meeting. And in the private meeting, you will listen more and you will hear the real story and the real needs. And they are the ones who stay in the house, the ones who are facing the challenges in the toilets, etc. So you really need, if you are working in the shelter sector and the WASH sector, you really need that information, but it is not easy for them to share it openly if they don't feel comfortable. And even I remember once, it was a very beautiful comment, but sad, that during one of these experiences, I was doing an assessment. It was a community, a very beautiful community, which was, because this comment was from men. It was a very strong community feeling. And I arrived, it was a community that never received assistance for a long time. And I was doing an assessment. And I remember in the first day they didn't tell me. When I came back, they said, we knew when we saw you, we knew that something will happen because you are a woman. And it was coming from a man because, well, I guess it was, I don't know why, but maybe because, I don't know, it was just a beautiful comment, but also sad because, and it was funny that it was coming from a man. So he was really empathic also with that. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Eva. We've had a few, really supportive comments from everybody and from men in the chat. And I thought it might be a nice time for the last bit of this panel discussion to move into, what are the positive actions that we can do in the shelter sector to move further towards gender equality and to, help this experience of women working in this sector. So if it's okay, Shada, would you be able to speak to that first, and then we'll go around again? Thank you.
Sure. I mean, it was a very interesting discussion, and a lot of things were already raised about how we can move forward. But I think we need to also think of this not. I mean, obviously, it's happening at a higher level of management and everything, but it's happening at all levels of our work, and I don't think we've been tackling it. I don't think we've been addressing it directly, that you need to treat your female colleagues better. You need to, and I think that's where we're lacking in a way. Just as an example, when I first started out, male homeowners would not take me seriously at all. And then my male colleague had to say, her word is as good as mine. So I think that, and that really helped build that trust with the community that we were working for. And I think we need to be better at just addressing this really directly and being very frank also with our teams and our line managers on these are the issues we're facing. We're not hiring more women. We're not doing, and someone said it's about, for instance, when the policies are written in place, talk to one another, talk to other people. It's not rocket science, I think, at this point. But yeah, those are just kind of my reflections on this. Hope I answered the question. Over.
Who else would like to contribute?
How can we move forward? I think there is two ways that we need to focus on. It's not separated, rather it is completing each other, let's say. The first one is how to hear more from the women beneficiaries, how to reflect on their needs. It's not only the challenge on us, it's also on the beneficiaries themselves. I remember like we are doing a shelter rehabilitation in the house, in the shelter, and a complaint came to us saying that the woman said the kitchen, she doesn't want the kitchen to be placed in this corner. She wanted to be placed outside, but the engineer didn't really listen to her. So she complained to us, and I received a complaint, and I was like, what, seriously? So we tried in our programming to make sure that the women are heard. However, how can I make sure that those women are, or the need of those women are really reflected? Is it by keep filling the gender markers on our activities without, and like writing it without really actioning it? How can I make sure those women those beneficiaries women are really, really heard and their needs are really, really reflected? It's not only to add a basket on the toilet for their pads. It's not only distributing the pads. It's a whole mechanism between us and the beneficiary that should be adapted to change. I don't know what is the right terminology, but there is a lot to be done there. The second part is the worker or us, the employees, how to make sure that there is enough women, and there is, I don't know how to define it, but I don't know if qualified woman is the right word for it, but to have a right woman in the right place. So you don't create a lot of pressure on her or underestimated her. And with putting her on the right place, build on it, like what she can do, what she's special in. Let's invest more on this. Let's, for example, like I am in the wash and shelter. I might be awful in wash. So someone should tell me, move to the shelter, leave the wash aside, for example, I'm giving. So invest more on this unique power, let's say, or unique contribution of women. That's how we need. How? I don't know. There is a lot to be worked on the policy, on the HR standards, on the management level, on our understanding, on our reflection, on how to really make the documents that we keep writing and integrated in our proposal, like the gender markers. It's an all proposal, I think. But actually, they are done? And I remember, like, I'm facilitating the gender markers. And the other side is like, Jude, let's be serious. This is like, yeah, I will tell you this. Yes, yes, we will do this and we will do that. But are they actually done? So how to really action and make it in place?
Yeah.
I think a lot.
Yeah. So I think, you know, picking up very much on we need to practice what we preach. We actually need to follow up on actions in programming when we are mainstreaming gender, but then we need to reflect that not just at a program level, but at an institutional level and all the way through all the different levels of staffing, and have, you know, perhaps as we've kind of suggested, one way forward is having more women in leadership roles, having more women in decision-making roles and in shelter teams, but generally. But what are the barriers to that, and what do we need to overcome?
Woman, and there is no, and you are keeping on the working hours, 8 hours a day. Most of the women weren't able to apply because they have responsibility in their houses. Like we are a wives and a parents, and like I need to plan my family. I need to do a lot. So it is my decision to be a housewife, a manager, and an architect, and a mother, and a wife. And it's all burden on me. And at the end of time, I'm sitting, it's like, why I'm doing that? Why I don't resign and enjoy my time with my son? And it's every night a question I'm asking myself. No one will decrease the working hour from 8 hours to 5 for women. I know that for a fact. But how, I'm not sure.
Okay, maybe Sadia or Eva or Shada or Laura will have some solutions. We have a few more minutes left to solve this solution, solve this problem, and then we will have to wrap up. And but I hope that this conversation will continue. I think one of the things that we're touching on now is recruitment, is the way that the jobs are designed, and some of the the barriers that sets up, and perhaps terms of reference, including for me it would be looking at culturally in each setting, what are we writing in terms of references which are perhaps adding barriers to women applying to those jobs, or what are we not writing into those job descriptions. And I think there is often a discussion about hard and soft skills as well that starts to be a gendered discussion, which I find quite interesting in terms of trying to create a gender balance and a skills balanced team. So yeah, I don't know if anyone wants to build on that, or if you would like to speak to something completely different, then please feel free.
Sure, I'll just have a quick point there, and then Eva, maybe you have some others too. I think there's something that you had said as well earlier that I would like to really strengthen, is that, and this is something I experienced as a cluster coordinator. I've done quite a bit of that, and every time we were looking at a strategy, we were like thinking about what women need, but we weren't necessarily thinking about what they can do, the potential there in the project participants. And I think sometimes our programs take that agency away. So very concrete example, in DRC, women build their homes. They take care that their children are safe, even after displacement. Very quickly, they work around things to make sure that there is a sort of a house available for their children. And that's huge potential. And none of our programs were actually looking at that potential in itself. So just be very mindful of, that dynamic. And we called it gender dynamic in the household. We try to bring it about. And it's true that it was on the table because I was cluster coordinator. I was, there was the first woman cluster coordinator after a while, and predominantly male teams. So I think creating or reinforcing that agency, that potential that exists, is very important. And equally so, we talked about policies, but behavior change is long due. And one of the very positive example that I've seen, I would like to just share, is that actually looking at our management systems is hugely important. The way the hierarchy in our management system is a little bit outdated. And to create, we talked a lot about creating space for women to talk on equal footing, right? But that's the way you manage a team as well, bringing out those potential, like for men, women in the team, and having a sort of configuration that allows that space, as well as, again, as a team manager, as a team leader. And I think those are things to explore, and think hopefully over time they become mainstream in our organizations. Thank you.
Eva.
Yeah, I'm gonna just echo
some final thoughts.
Yeah, I'm gonna just echo some of the comments I read quickly, because there are so many interactions. That's super nice to see. I hope that we will also keep record of all these messages of how men can support, can be more supportive with women, just listening and asking questions to us, and really try to connect with us and have a normal conversation with us, and asking about our thoughts, our feelings, our needs, and also, of course, also as Sadia said, of also seeing out the potential on women in a different, I don't know, it's hard to say, but it's to understand that the skills also are not just what is the career, and we know that, but it's not based on the background or what did you study. It's also, we have so many skills, and we have different skills, men and women. So trying to understand that and promote that. And just talking with us. It's just talking, and also me, while talking and while sharing this, you can also support us in the field, when we are in the field or when we are having discussions, and you see that you will notice immediately what we are talking about now, because you will know already.
Fantastic. I'm really sorry, but we're going to have to bring this panel discussion to an end. I'm enjoying it so much. Could go on forever, but I am going to hand over to Laura just to tie up. But thank you so much for those that have contributed and the questions as well. Laura.
Great, thank you. Thanks. That was such an interesting and such a rich discussion. I did warn everyone up front that we were just scratching the surface, and I think with so many of these aspects, we could, sort of go deeply into any number of them and have a whole conversation on all of these different aspects, and also in relation to to challenges, and also to what needs to change. So I think this really is a starting point for a lot of future conversations, hopefully. I think also, I guess, sort of one overarching comment, I suppose, is that in thinking about improving gender equity, I guess it's clear that improving gender equity in the sector would be better for women, it would be better for men, and it would lead to better programming. So it's win-win-win. In terms of wrap up, a whole bunch of thank yous. So thank you so much to all of the panelists for being involved in this session, to Jude, Shada, Sadia, Eva. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and sharing your insights, and also for being so willing to be part of a conversation that's not that easy to be a part of. And a huge thank you also to everyone who's contributed in the chat and shared your thoughts and reflections. A big thank you as well to everyone who completed the survey and has engaged in the survey and contributed to that. And also a special thank you to everyone who supported in the process of developing the survey. So in feeding into the survey design, in reviewing the draft, and in data analysis, I think there were between 20 to 30 women from the group involved. So it was a massive team effort. So it's a really impressive collaboration, I think. So thank you so much for that. And lastly, a big thank you to UK Shelter Forum for providing this platform for us to be able to have this conversation. So then just lastly, in terms of next steps, as mentioned before, there will be a report coming soon, or at some point, and when it is ready, we'll be sharing on all of the sort of usual humanitarian shelter type platforms. So we'll make sure to disseminate that when once it's out. So watch this space, and thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Tom, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I was talking happily away, but a huge thank you to everyone, all the panelists and everyone who's contributed to the work going into this. It's an enormously thought-provoking and I think both challenging and inspiring start to the forum, and I really hope the conversation does carry on both inside UK Shelter Forum and outside it, and it'd be really interesting to see what the next steps should be, and of course I hope UK Shelter Forum continues to support that. With that, we have a 30-minute break for everyone to reflect and have a cup of tea or a snack or lunch wherever you are. So please take the 30 minutes, and please be back at or just before 3 o'clock UK time, and we will kick off again with the next set of presentations. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, so we are recording again. And yeah, go ahead, Amelia.
Okay, so without further ado, I'll hand over to the first of our updates from the Global Shelter Cluster. I believe that will be Ella.
Okay, thank you everyone, and thank you for the organizers for putting this very exciting session right after the very inspiring session of women in shelter. It's going to be hard to keep the interest at the same level. I think this is going to be a little bit run of the mill, but I hope you'll bear with us for that. And also I have to say that it was very inspiring to listen to all our colleagues, and also words of support from our male colleagues. So I hope it was an eye-opener, and everyone will be going about their careers and their daily work with this in mind. So Miguel and I, we would like to just take 10 minutes to give you a little bit of an update on what's happening with the Global Shelter Cluster at the moment. Some of you are, of course, engaged in it on a daily basis and follow it very closely, so it could be a little bit of a repetition, but for others, I think it's a good moment to touch base, because there are some exciting new things happening that will hopefully increase the engagement by everyone as we go forward. So next slide, please. Okay, so I just want to give you a little bit of an update on where we are with the strategy and what's going on with the activities, because we have 2 new grants that have either recently started or about to start. And Miguel is also going to join in to give an update on our approaching annual meeting, which will be unfortunately online this year again. But hopefully it will still be really interesting to engage in, and it will be easier for everyone around the world to join in like last year. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm not so sure if everyone can see it, because some of the colors are a little bit vague, but as you know, we are at the moment in the 4th year of our 5-year strategy. So we should be wrapping up at the end of next year. So we have gone over the mid-mark of our strategy, which was built on 4 pillars. First one is coordination, of course, that's what we do. Second one is advocacy, third one is evidence-based response, and fourth one is capacity. Those were the work streams that were identified at the end of our previous 5-year strategy as the areas that our work should focus on. And running across all these pillars are what we call the good programming components that are protection, gender, disability, and environment. As you know, of course, we have under these 4 pillars different indicators at global level, country level, but also at agency level, which gives a possibility to all our partners to find a place for their activities to contribute to the common objectives. Next one, please. So as I mentioned, we have 2 new grants that will hopefully allow us in the last year and a half that we have left to make even more progress on some of these results that have that either need our constant engagement or has been a little bit lagging behind, or at least not receiving enough attention as we would have liked to. The first one is from USAID BHA, which actually started about 6 months ago in earnest. So the start date is October 2020. It's a 24-month grant for the total amount of almost $2 million US. And so the implementation has already started on this grant, and the recipient is IFRC on behalf of the cluster, and the funds are distributed about 1/3 IFRC, 1/3 for UNHCR, and 1/3 for our partners. I think many of you will have responded to the partner call for that we had run in the last couple of months. And right now we have all the projects selected, and we're at the stage of contracting, and hopefully the implementation of the activities will start very soon. We were very happy to receive a really wide range of proposals from even more partners than before. So it was really exciting for us to be able to do this all together. And through this grant, we will be able to hopefully achieve 2 results, which you can see there, which is mainly focusing on the coordination, but also on aspects of localization. Of course, we will be able to support our working groups work and hopefully take our joint work even further. The second grant, which is still in the working, let's say, in the pipeline, is the one that will be coming through ECHO, which is mainly focusing on one of those elements that I mentioned at the bottom, the cross-cutting issues and environment and greening. So we're still putting the last touches on that one. And Miguel is closely involved in that, so he will be running you through it. And that one is going to be going through UNHCR on behalf of the cluster, like it had been the case with previous grants from ECHO. And I think with that, I will hand over to Miguel to walk us through that exciting area of work.
Thank you very much, Ella. Hi, everyone. My name is Miguel Urquia. I am the Deputy Global Shelter Cluster Coordinator on behalf of UNHCR. So additional to the BHA project that Ella has presented before, the Global Shelter Cluster presented a proposal to ECHO at the end of last year. The proposal now has been agreed from ECHO, and we are having the final negotiations, basically doing the last fine-tuning of the indicators. This project is aiming at greening the shelter and settlement response, and it builds on the great work that has been done by the Global Shelter Cluster Environment Community of Practice and by many of you in the last quite some years, actually. As you can see, the project starts on the 1st of April for a duration of 24 months. It's relatively modest. We are receiving 650,000 euro from ECHO, and the rest are co-funding contributions. The UNHCR will receive the funds on behalf of the cluster. And as you can see, it has 3 main activities. The first one happening at the global level. It's about mainly changing the specifications and the way we use some of those global shelter response tools. And the second one is developing tools for country-level clusters to green the responses. And the third one is happening at the country level, basically to help country-level clusters become greener. We will soon launch a call for expressions of interest, similar to the one that was done for BHA, for implement these activities. And we follow a very similar breakdown of the funds. I think in this one, a bit more funds are even going to the partners, but it's 40% to the partners, and then the remaining is split between UNHCR and IFRC. Could we go to the next slide, please?
Sure, and you have a 2-minute warning, Miguel, as well.
Thank you so much. So here we will talk about an activity of the Global Shelter Cluster. The Global Shelter Cluster meeting, as you know, it happens annually. The objectives are to identify and address issues coming from country-level clusters and global issues from ISC, review the deliverables of the cluster during the year, and advance the 2018-2022 strategy. The theme for this year is shelter and settlement in a changing environment. And similar to last year, we will do it online. As you can see, last year we had many sessions, many participants, but we learned from that. And this year we will try to do even better, and we've made a few changes. We have expanded the duration of the meeting by having country updates as satellite sessions. and they will start on the 5th of May and end in October, once a week, a country update. And then we have compressed the other events into, could we go forward? The remaining events into 8 days between the 7th and the 17th of June, 2-3 events per day. We will be sending a calendar, a global update very soon with all the details and the calendar invites. So please sign up to the Global Shelter Cluster newsletter to receive that. We're happy to answer this in the chat. Thank you very much. I will send the link to the newsletter sign up in the chat now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miguel. Okay, so next, apologies. Next, could I please welcome Buban Aswari and Bishan, who are going to speak on behalf of HRRP. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Emilia, and the whole UK Shelter Forum team for organizing this event and giving us the opportunity to speak our experience basically on urban housing recovery in post-earthquake Nepal. Namaste and good evening from Nepal. I am Bhuvaneshwari Parajuli, working as a national coordinator for housing recovery and reconstruction platform, HRRP, and I have like co-presenter Bishan. Next, please. Yeah, we'll be like basically briefly touch the 2015 earthquake in Nepal with urban housing recovery progress and the study that HRRP has carried out to identify the urban housing recovery issues, followed by some recommendations. And after that, what we are presently doing at the moment with urban recovery, we'll touch upon this moving forward as well. Next, please. Yeah, as we all know, like Nepal was hit by 7.6 magnitude on 25th of April 2015, causing heavy loss in life and property. And it was a kind of our biggest earthquake in 80 years. So it impacted 32 out of 77 districts, and nearly 1 million houses were collapsed and damaged. And out of them, 40% were in urban areas. So after the earthquake, National Reconstruction Authority was set up in December 2015 as a special vehicle to lead and facilitate the reconstruction, including the private housing. So the government provided a grant of 300,000 Nepalese rupees, which comes to $2,500 in 3 installments to the eligible households. And now it has been more than 5 years. And if we look at the reconstruction progress, we have completed almost 80% of reconstruction. The reconstruction, housing reconstruction being one of the largest, even globally. So the achievement is quite satisfactory. Next, please. Yeah, but if we go into a little bit deeper, the achievement is not the same as compared to rural and urban. So we have like rural, we have completed almost 82% in rural housing, whereas urban it is only 61%. And it's more interesting to note that this contrast is more prominent in Kathmandu Valley versus outside Kathmandu Valley. In Kathmandu Valley, only the 38.8% have been like completed in urban area, whereas Valley it has gone up to 71%. Next, please. So in a way, like it has drawn the attention of the government as well as the partner organization working in urban recovery, and it was assumed that the urban housing recovery would be more efficient and like faster because the people, they are in better off in terms of access to information, market, materials, human resources as compared to the rural one. But it appeared to be just opposite, and so everyone realized that the urban housing is not that simple as we thought. It's more complex, and often the issues are often interlinked. Next, please. So HRRP, in collaboration with government and the partner organization, led and facilitate a study by forming urban recovery technical working group to identify the issues in urban housing, and it carried out basically two assessment. One was quantitative and another was the qualitative assessment. The qualitative assessment was carried out across 6-7 districts with 14 focus group discussion, 9 KIIs, and to substantiate that quantitative assessment was done. More than 800 households were surveyed at that time, and it was again also carried out across 6 districts. And the selection of the district was basically on the urban characteristics, whether it was a core urban area or peri-urban area, heritage-based or dominated by RCC building. So basically, those were the characteristics for the selection of the quantitative survey. Next, please. Yeah, the issue basically find out, the quantitative study find out or identify more than 55 priorities, and it was clustered into 11 categories, and you can see that even finance, there are sub-issues, and even each sub-issues has further sub-issues. So the finance was the most critical issue in urban housing recovery, followed by land and heritage, then comes retrofitting and all the technical know-how, which was the barrier for the urban reconstruction. Yes, please, next. Now I'll stop for now. My colleague Bishan will continue from this slide. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Namaste everyone. I'm Bishan Wagle. Good evening. So let me continue on our presentation. So following the qualitative study, we had a quantitative study in August 2020, where this was a follow-up scoping study of January 2020. We found out 7 major issues, the challenge of reconstruction, basically in which finance was the biggest issue, followed by land. So interestingly, both the findings of the qualitative as well as the quantitative, they matched together. So the same issues came up from both studies, which was kind of validating the issues found by the earlier study. So as you can see, finance had 58% of the issues, followed by land. And if you go deeper into the finance issue, the people which had the highest problem, 77%, was with regards to insufficient income to build up their houses. So the issue of income, insufficient income, the issue of higher interest on the loans were key issues that was found out by the quantitative study. Next. So talking about the problems, one of the issue was the STA, the socio-technical assistance that the government was providing. Basically, the STA consisted of a range of support that was provided to the housing, to ensure operative standards which followed by when reconstructing a house post-disaster, post-earthquake, in which the NRO engineers helped in the local level to support the housing reconstruction. Now, as you can see on my left, even besides, despite the STA, there were several issues, and one of them was the on-site construction issues, in which the material cost had highest problems, 23% people having problems with the demolition, material cost, labor, to name more. If you see on my bottom on the left, 51% also people had problems of not being able to access the ST assistance. The reason for that was because most of the partners were focused in the rural settings, and there were less partners in the urban settings. So that led to these higher percent of people not being able to access the assistance in the rural level. That's why that was a problem. If you go to the STA, there were 7 packages from door-to-door technical assistance to on-the-job training and training of missions and everything. So despite all these, the reason for less was because there were less POs in the urban settings compared to the rural. Next. Now, since we conducted these 2 big studies, which found out several issues, we came up with a kind of joint recommendations based on the experience and issues from the field. The major issues that recommendation, again, focusing narrowed down on the housing issue, finance issue, was setting up a revolving fund at the local level, then the suggestion of incremental housing, followed by community-based cooperatives, then the need and incentives to use local materials at the local level so that low-cost construction can be promoted. Followed by that, again, of course, there was a need to amend some laws in the legal framework of the country to tailor to the current need of that time. Then there was need also on the loans so that banks could provide loans, if there was a flexible guidelines. And there was a need for the facilitation by the central and the commercial banks of the country. Then followed by the tax exemptions and other provisions that can actually help people to access these loans. Finally, there was also need to revise the existing the procedure, the government legal procedure on how people can access the concessional loan. Thank you. Next, please.
Ishan, you have one more minute if you can possibly keep to time.
Thank you. Thank you. So finally, just to narrow down the 2 issues, land and finance. And the finance, the joint policy recommendation from the study was that there's need to access affordable housing and then focus on the low interest loans. Together on the issue of land, there was issue of to try to do several things that can be improved in multiple ownership housing. Next one. Final one, please. Next one, thank you. Okay, so moving forward now, since the reconstruction process is not complete, it's still ongoing, there's a need for us to move from recovery to resilience. And as we know from the presentation, urban recovery is a very complex, time-consuming process. It's going to take longer. So there's a need for so much to do, from how we can integrate recovery to resilience. Several policy reforms are ongoing by the government, and then integration is also ongoing. And there's also need for where we can, based on the learnings from past 6 years, joint pathway in which development partners and government can take forward the urban housing issues. And then finally, there is also need for the area-based settlement approach to be applied. And finally, all these recovery learnings from the earthquake has to be linked to the global recovery context. So this is basically as we move forward. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening to us. Thank you so much. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you, Vishan. That was great. Thank you for that. And thank you for keeping to time. So I'm going to pass over now to Chuck Setchell, who's going to talk to us about BHA, aka the old or the new USAID. Chuck, please go ahead and perhaps introduce yourself as well for others.
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Amelia, and thank you, Tom, for inviting me to present, and to you and others for organizing and hosting this very good event. I particularly enjoyed the earlier session on women in shelter. It was very, very good. Greetings to all, and regardless of time zone and location, I trust that you and yours are well. It's Earth Day. I don't know that that's been mentioned yet, but it's a good reminder of the importance of settlements and the need to plan and manage humanitarian activities with context in mind, including environmental conditions and impacts, which are often overlooked. Next slide, please. Yes, Amelia, after 56 years, no more OFDA. The demise happened officially last October 1st. We are now called the Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance. We combined with our Office of Food for Peace, and now have a food assistance and non-food assistance, humanitarian assistance under one banner. We are the only bureau in USAID that provides humanitarian aid while facilitating longer-term recovery. Next slide, please. We have a new expanded team. As you know, it used to be me and a couple of other people. We now have 7, and we're growing. We will probably have 10 or so soon. We now have architects, engineers, planners, even a doctor. to focus on our pandemic issues, COVID issues, protection issues, etc. Alex Miller is now the acting team lead. It was discovered after some period of time that because I'm not officially a government employee, I wasn't supposed to be managing government employees or approving budgets, things like that. So we're clarifying our administrative thing. Interesting point. We'll talk about that later, Chiara. Next slide, please. New guidelines. We have emergency application guidelines now. We actually have 4 different accounts, financial accounts in addition, including actually the humanitarian accounts. So we have specific guidelines for emergency applications. They'll be in effect from October 1 of last year for a couple more years. The link is there. I'm sure you've seen it online. We are actively doing that, using that now, and we will be, of course, revising it in 2 years. Next slide, please. So some not so new top line issues. We have, as you know, in recent conversations at the global shelter cluster level and elsewhere, emphasized this notion of coverage, maximizing coverage of identified needs with available resources, with minimally adequate or minimally appropriate responses. We're less interested in funding boutique level, small scale activity with limited potential for impact. Plastic sheeting as a shelter input and not an NFI, non-food item. Our proposal guidelines were revised in 2018 to reflect this, but yet some proposals still reflect the old way of thinking. This requires often significant back and forth with prospective implementing partners, causing further delay to affected populations. So something to think about: shelters and input, plastic sheeting as an input to shelter. Defining humanitarian construction. This is still a work in progress. We hope to get some significant clarity on this by interacting with a lot of our engineering staff. We have an agency-wide construction policy that requires us to adhere fairly strictly to construction guidelines. So our focus is on emergency and transitional shelter and settlements assistance, and not on reconstruction or permanent new development. Next slide, please. So not so new common comments on proposals. Some of you may recall the 2017 version of common comments. We're hoping in the next few days, actually, to be able to issue, hopefully in the next few days or weeks, to issue another set of common comments, some of which will cover some of the items that are listed there. We're pushing back on a few things, of course, reconstruction. We don't want to pay for paint. Please don't send us applications that include 6 coats of paint, 3 coats of paint. You'd be surprised how much that adds up over the course of a couple hundred proposals. Next slide, please. Some new guidance notes. In addition to the common comments, we have prepared half dozen or so 1- and 2-page guidance notes that we hope to issue in the coming weeks and months. They'll be followed by another tranche of probably another 8 or 10. These hopefully will provide some a bit more clarity on some of the key points that we see as either important or in need of clarification, or that are common, an extension of the common comments idea. Next slide, please. And recent work of note. We completed this past year a 10 years on review of a post-earthquake project in Haiti featuring confirmation of the neighborhood approach. Some of you may know this project as the Ravine Pintade project, or perhaps the Cartier project, Project Concern International, and now Global Communities were a part of that activity. Very impressive results. The transitional shelter and settlements approach has evolved into a permanent recovery. And we've seen that in some of our other 10 years on activities. We completed the Settlements Approach Guidance Note Project with the Global Shelter Cluster Urban Settlements Working Group this past December. There was yet another discussion event earlier this morning. We are socializing that as much as we can, promoting some online training as well. Just initiated, as Ella mentioned, a 2-year engagement with the Global Shelter Cluster. Part of that was requesting rejuvenation of the donor consultative group. We had our first meeting earlier in the week, a meet and greet, if you will, because it had been in some time. We hope to make it a much more substantive group going forward. We actually not just initiated, but we're actually completing the IEC project with the Global Shelter Cluster to increase access to and improve the quality of IEC materials going forward. Continuing work with diaspora communities on DRR through IOM. The diaspora communities in particular, the Bangladeshi, the Haitian, and Filipino diaspora communities, you can imagine, not unlike in England. We have thousands of diaspora communities in the United States with remarkable resources and capacities, and we are only now tapping into that. Continuing support for the Interaction, Shelter, and Settlements Working Group. I think that has been, over the years, proven to be really a remarkable forum for North American NGOs and others to participate in similar activities to the UK Shelter Forum. Mohammed Hilmi, my good colleague, has been managing that from inception and has done a remarkable job. And continuing support of our Shelter and Settlements Grad Student Fellowship Program. We started this 9 years or so ago. We've had approximately a dozen fellows, graduate students, and we just learned this last year, because of the pandemic, we did not support any travel. So we took a hiatus to evaluate our program, and lo and behold, it's yielding some very positive results in terms of accessing people who are interested in humanitarian assistance, shelter and settlements in particular, into the sector, which has been very, very gratifying. And I will add that about 90% of our fellows have been female, which was promoted actively, and it's actually worked out well. When I started this work back in the 90s, it was rare to see a woman in a shelter meeting, and now we're seeing remarkable collaboration on a range of issues that are incredibly important to the sector. Next slide, please.
You have less than a minute, Chuck. So
thank you for your time. How about that, Amelia? We timed that out rather well. So I can take some questions in the chat box, and I'll look for that going forward. But I really appreciate the time and good wishes for continued success with the forum. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Chuck. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Stefano Pompei from Build Change, and he is going to be talking to us about technology and it being a game changer in safer housing. Stefano, are you there? Perfect.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizer of the UK Shelter Forum for inviting me here today. And let me introduce myself. My name is Stefano Pompei. I'm a structural engineer, and I've been working at Build Change since 2016. In this presentation, I would like to focus on how Build Change addresses the challenge of making substandard housing safer by leveraging technology as a way to make structural engineering accessible to the most in need and to achieve a large-scale impact. Next slide should come automatically. Yeah. Build Change was founded in 2004 and now operates in several countries around the world with the main goal of preventing deaths and economic losses in earthquakes, hurricanes, and typhoons. We achieve this by training homeowners, masons, local architects and engineers on earthquake resistant practices, but also by retrofitting and strengthening houses and schools. The world is facing a big challenge, and that's called substandard housing. By 2030, almost 1/3 of the world population will be living in substandard housing. The exponential growth of informal housing has been an everlasting problem, and one of the main reasons why the vulnerability of the people living in these areas has seen abrupt increase. Colombia is one of the largest economies in South America, and by the way, a wonderful country. And however, it struggles from a geographical, socioeconomical, and urbanistic perspective. Its biggest cities, Bogota and Medellin, are located in medium-high seismic hazard areas. 50 years of armed conflict forced people from rural areas to move into an urban context. People overcrowding and uncontrolled development led to the formation of many new informal neighborhoods. Informal neighborhoods and seismic hazard exposure imply a huge risk, especially for the low-income families. Improving substandard houses is what Colombia is looking to address. Several governmental agencies put in place programs that aim to improve hundreds of thousands of houses, and Bill Change is appointed as a technical consultant to support them in this challenge. In a few words, improving a house means two things. First, making it stronger so it can withstand earthquakes and windstorms better. Second, upgrading its habitability conditions. We are talking of building or retrofitting walls, columns, beams to make the house safer, and fixing toilets, kitchens, lighting and ventilation in order to provide the household with a healthier and more comfortable environment. Improving a substandard house requires technical staff to perform an initial assessment, analyze its deficiencies, and to design a solution to make it stronger and more livable. In this presentation, we will focus on 4 of these 6 steps of the value chain we can see here. I'll try to provide a quick overview of the workflow to be followed to improve the structural performances and also the habitability standards of houses, highlighting in each step the central role of technology and automation. So let's see how technology is changing the house improvement journey. A few years ago, when walking into a house, the technical staff had a clipboard and a set of pre-printed sheets. They could fill with all the socioeconomic data of the household, the building main features, the building deficiencies. Nowadays, we use tablets and data collection software to gather this type of information. For example, we are able to automatically import seismic and wind parameters based on the GPS coordinates of the building to be used then in the following steps of the value chain we saw before. We can take photos, grab videos. In general, digitalization allowed us to make our work easier, more efficient, and now the interaction between people in the field and people in the office happens almost in real time. Pencils, erasers, and portable calculators are not needed anymore in the field. In fact, the use of digital tools, in this specific case of floor planners, to draw the house layout, it's an incredible step forward in terms of accuracy of the measurements, immediate availability of this information in the office, and in my opinion, also a significant reduction of the stress caused by having to deal with a lot of objects in a sometimes challenging environment. Before digitalization, only simple data processing could be performed in the field. In these days, data collection software allow us to gather all the information we need to process it live while assessing the house, and to have an output to be discussed with the technical staff and with the homeowners directly in the field. We don't have to look at the floor plans drawn in the field anymore, trying to understand them in order to be transferred to AutoCAD. Our engineers and developers have been able to work on a few Dynamo scripts. And for who doesn't know, Dynamo is an add-on that comes included with Revit, a BIM software developed by Autodesk, and it's a visual programming language. So I was saying our staff has been able to work on a few Dynamo scripts that can read the information collected in the floor planner, Magic Plan in this case, and automatically generate a 3D model of the existing house in Revit, obviously. The next. Okay, thanks. I'm leaving here a YouTube link where you can see more about the automatic generation of 3D model of a 3D model of a house. Next, please. Next step is engineering calculations. Spreadsheets are fun to develop, at least for me, but having to use them, especially when your project is scaling up and you have many houses to design, can be cumbersome. Through technology and digitalization, exactly, thanks. Through technology and digitalization, our processes, our engineers are have been able to code pre-engineered prescriptive checks directly into Dynamo, based on the existing house 3D model. And thanks to these scripts, a retrofit intervention is automatically proposed. However, it's important to highlight that technical staff is always required and responsible to validate the automatic output. Next, please.
2-minute warning.
Okay, as you can imagine, this photo doesn't exactly represent what we were doing before starting using BIM software. Next, however, nowadays generating drawings, construction details, and bill of quantities is much easier. And once the interventions needed to improve and strengthen the house are validated by the technical staff, generating drawings and bill of quantities happens in a matter of minutes. Next. And next, yeah, it's okay. Construction supervision benefited by the use of technology too. Data collection software is used to keep track of the visits made to the house, creating a construction log where the technical staff notes down the state of the works and the issue that might arise. Next, please. Yeah, we are trying to bring taking pictures to the next level. Our engineers and developers have been working with IBM in training an artificial intelligence so that it can recognize the most common issues we are facing during the construction phase. In this example, thanks to Dynamo and Revit, we created several iterations of good and bad stirrups. The homeowner, who is not an expert in good construction practices, can take a picture of a stirrup that doesn't look good to him or her, and the artificial intelligence will tell after a few seconds if the stirrup is not okay, next, or if it is okay, next. Okay, next. Here's a video you might like to watch about AI checks, next. So summing up, next, the use of technology and the digitalization of our processes allowed us to improve data management and processing, reduce the chance of mistakes and oversights, and increase transparency. In addition to that, while engineers and architects still review the final design, their time is leveraged better because less experienced staff can do a big part of the work. Also, we reduced significantly the time needed to assess and design a house from 9 to 1.5 days, being in this way 6 times more productive. We reduced cost, and finally, we have been able to impact more the people in need. Next. Thank you very much for joining me today. If you have any questions, you can write them in the chat or email me at Stefano.
Brilliant. Thank you, Stefano, and thank you for keeping to time. That was great.
Thank you.
We're going to continue our technology theme now, and I'm going to hand over to Louise Fawkes, who's going to talk about owner-driven home construction in Dominica. Thank you, Louise. Louise, are you here? Do we have a backup plan if Louise is not here?
Ilan here, do you want me to just present?
Do you know the project, Ilan?
Well, I know I present my project because I don't have slides.
Okay.
Let's just go to the break because there's a break straight after this presentation. So we will bring the break forward 10 minutes and we will see if Louise appears before the end.
Perfect. Sounds like a good solution. Okay.
So, which means I need to do some arithmetic in my head. We have a 15-minute break. So if everyone can be back at 4 o'clock BST, we will carry on. Is that all right with everyone? I'll assume silence means yes. So we'll see you all back at 4 o'clock.
Tom, could you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Fab. So I'm very excited to share with you today a project that Build Change has been working on in Dominica. If you're able to see my colleague Stefano's earlier presentation on technology for engineering, then fantastic. This should follow on nicely for that as a kind of case study example. If not, not to worry, this should also stand on its own 2 feet. So just a bit of background to the situation in Dominica that this project sits within. As I'm sure many of you know, Dominica was hit very badly by Hurricane Maria in 2017, particularly in the housing sector where 90% of houses were affected, of which 19% were completely destroyed. There are about 25,000 houses in Dominica, so the completely destroyed number comes down to just over 4,000, about 4,300. I apologize, there's a slight omission on this slide. The total damages estimated there were $930.9 million US, which is equivalent to 224% of Dominica's GDP. So just absolutely enormous damages. As part of the government's response to this, in terms of housing, they had already been working on a huge overhaul of the country's housing infrastructure. But in particular response to Hurricane Maria, they set up the Housing Recovery Project, or the HRP, with financing from the World Bank. This was a homeowner-driven reconstruction program. So as I'm sure you know, that led by the homeowner with cash disbursements directly to owners that are conditional on successful completion of each stage of construction. They had budget initially for 1,700 homes, so somewhere between a third and half of those completely destroyed homes And we're really aiming to use this funding for the most vulnerable people in Dominica. Their eligibility criteria are defined here. Basically, they were looking at the most vulnerable, people who own the land, and the smallest houses as a kind of way to somehow quantify vulnerability easily. They'd also defined it 8 stages of the project. So, and I should add that these are their graphics. These are not Build Change's graphics. This was all put together by the project team in Dominica beautifully. So they defined these 8 stages from application right through to a new complete house. They were expecting a huge number of applications, however, so they wanted a system that could easily manage that, and they had a very small team, so they needed something that could help them process all of this information coming in and applications in a secure and transparent way. So this is where Build Change came in. We were hired to support them building a management information system that would manage the initial application process, and then provide them with a tool to run the project right through to completion of houses. So as Stefano mentioned earlier, Build Change, we like to work with this 6-step construction value chain, which looks at understanding the problem first through data collection and processing, and sharing to make sure everybody understands that problem, and then designing, financing, building, and then finally looping back to report on what's been done, although I think the reporting is often continuously throughout as well as at the end. So I said a management information system, but what do I mean by this often used acronym? So really it was a suite of digital tools, some that would be used by the project staff, some that would be used by the public. So the brains behind it all that was really doing all the work was a web platform. But then we also built 2 apps to complement that. So one for data collection that would be used by the project staff, but then also an awareness app and a link to the Government of Dominica's website that could be accessed by homeowners or by the general public to get all the information they needed about the project, to get any contact details and submit grievances. So bringing all of this together in this quite busy slide, but I wanted to kind of show how it all fits together for you. Along the top, you have that homeowner journey, which is the same as the wheel that the Housing Recovery Project team had developed. And then down at the bottom, you have all these different components of what we're calling the MIS, so the apps and the web platform and the links to the government website. And just showing at the beginning, the application, the site surveys, that's the data collection. That's where we were using the data. We developed a data collection app, and we're using that for this, which I'll come on to in a little bit more detail. That data was then processed, and the team could easily access the results of the processed data on a web platform. We then had step 3, the design stage, which was not done by Build Change. There was a consortium hired for that, which involved Article 25 and Clark Bond, amongst others. The system could then also be used, although again, similar to design, it wasn't for the design, it wasn't for the financing, but it was used to track that. So the designs are uploaded, permits are issued based on the uploaded designs, and then all the finances can be entered and monitored in a transparent and secure way on the system. And then finally, the reporting of quality that happens continuously throughout, that the team can see what's happening, and it outputs in various different ways, which again, I will talk for another minute on in a second. So going back to the beginning, talking about data collection, the very first stage of this project was for people to apply to it. If they meet the eligibility requirements, then they could join the program. So as I said, for this, we developed a data collection app. I think one of the best things about this app was that it could be used offline. So anybody could fill in the application form on their phone or on their computer. If they didn't have one of those things, they could meet with one of the social mobilizers in a community meeting, or the social mobilizer could come to their home, fill in that form. That would then automatically appear on the web platform for the project team to review. And it really was just a quick review because the system could already filter based on the answers in the application form whether this applicant would be eligible or not. The next stage then, if they did meet those initial eligibility requirements, was for an in-person site survey. So this was partly to review the applicant applicability, but it was also to look at site hazards and review the condition of the existing structure. So site hazards, this was particularly important for this project because they wanted to make sure that they were not rebuilding on any dangerous sites. This is incredibly difficult in Dominica, where they are affected by almost all possible hazards and have quite low availability of land that is safe for construction. So it was a key criteria for the project to try and assess that as much as possible at an early stage, so no applicant was getting through the process. So the key part of the site survey was that they would take a GPS coordinate as part of the survey form on their phone. If you go to the next slide, this was then used to reference against the available hazard maps that the government already had. So by no means are these maps perfect. They could certainly do with being at a larger scale, certainly do more detailed maps in urban areas and things like that. But we were able to use what was available, and this made the eligibility screening 1,000,000 times faster because just based on those coordinates collected, you were able to verify that against the national hazard maps for flooding and landslides, as well as protected land use areas.
1 minute left.
Fantastic. So then finally, I've talked about how the data collection happened. There was then the system's able to track the design and construction and completion of all stages, which I won't go into detail today, but I will just show you a quick slide on the reporting because the poor project implementation team, there are only 6 of them, and they had an enormous number of reporting lines, both to their own government as well as to the World Bank, as well as everything they needed to track internally. So we tried to make it as easy as possible for them by building in a number of automatic graphs and graphics for them to easily be able to just pull those numbers for reporting as quickly as possible. So a quick thank you for this quick presentation and to be part of today. If anybody else is working on these kind of systems or trying to digitize the kind of full scale of shelter programs in this way, we'd love to hear from you and discuss further. And of course, please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Some really fascinating stuff there from both those presentations from Build Change. With that, we're going to go on to, with the slight change I talked about before, to Ilan Kalman, who will talk to us about climate change and its importance for humanitarian shelter and settlements. Over to you, Ilan.
Thank you very much. And again, sorry about the change. I need to zip out at the top of the hour, so appreciate it. And I don't have slides myself. I'm really just going to talk, which also says that I've put my contact details in the chat. So please do connect with me, link to me. If you're watching this afterwards, then just do a web search on my name and you can find my contact details. Be always happy to be in touch and to look at these issues regarding intersecting long-term changes such as climate change with a lot of what goes on in the humanitarian world. And really what I'm presenting here is simply a summary of the potential implications of climate change for humanitarian shelter and settlements. At UCL, at University College London in London, I do climate change science. So I do some aspects of climate change projections, but mostly on climate change adaptation and also looking at health impacts, really the people impacts of climate change. Here, I'm going to provide headline summaries of key topics: disasters, conflict, and migration. If you would like any full scientific papers or commentaries, then again, please put a note in the chat. Please contact me directly and happy to exchange information. The first step is understanding what climate change is. And taking United Nations definitions, climate change is weather statistics changing over decades. That's all it is. By definition, long-term changes to the weather. Climate change, of course, has happened since the Earth formed, and these natural influences continue. The real problem that we have today is how rapidly and substantially human activity is changing the climate. So we're releasing greenhouse gases, we're destroying ecosystems which absorb them, and this increased greenhouse gas concentration traps more heat from the sun, that heats up the planet, and this is what changes the weather. There is no doubt that human-caused climate change is happening now and swiftly compared to many natural mechanisms. But okay, so what? Does climate change actually cause weather disasters? Well, we know that the disaster is not what the environment does all the time, such as earthquakes or weather, because sometimes we get a disaster and sometimes we do not. The real issue is how society is able or not able to deal with the environment. That determines the disaster. We do not use the phrase natural disaster because disasters are not natural. They come from our decisions, not from the environment. But climate change, by definition, is changing weather. So the issue is not whether the rain changes. The issue is whether or not our umbrellas work. The usual saying is that there is no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing. But not everyone can afford an umbrella. Not everyone can afford the clothing. Not everyone can afford good shelter from the rain and the wind, as all of you know from your work in these situations. So climate change is not the issue for shelter and settlement because all it does is change the weather. Disasters are the issue for humanitarian shelter and settlements, and disasters are not caused by the weather or by the changing weather, with exceptions. And one huge exception with regard to climate change is higher heat and humidity. Climate change is creating heat-humidity combinations where much more frequently indoor temperature control is essential to survive. Not everyone can afford indoor cooling 24/7, obviously in a tent or other transitional settlement. And of course, many people work outdoors or collect firewood or water outdoors. When heat humidity goes beyond human survival, as it is because of human-caused climate change, there is really nothing that we can do. So this is where this sector needs to think about disasters and about day-to-day life. Because heat humidity is going to affect huge populations lethally, and this is a major disaster factor that we must be concerned about from human-caused climate change. Another type of disaster is conflict. And the media loves these phrases, climate conflict, climate wars. Yet, you know what? We don't wake up in the morning and say, well, you know, yesterday it was 33 degrees Celsius. The thermometer says 34 today, so I'm going to invade a country. You know, of course we don't do that. It's the same with resources. Human history has so many examples of resource abundance leading to peace or conflict, and resource scarcity leading to peace or conflict. With conflict, there are always other factors, human factors. These come from people, not the climate, and not how the climate is changing. So we have to be wary of these headlines, trying to attribute war to climate change. And Syria is a perfect example. Syria's major drought in 2010 to 2011, yes, there was definitely a much higher likelihood of it happening because of human-caused climate change. Over the previous century, Syria had 3 or 4 droughts which were as bad or worse than 2010 to 2011. And of course, over previous decades, Syria had been led by oppressive dictators who mismanaged the country's water and agriculture. The country, sadly, was ripe for a conflict, irrespective of climate change. And even without climate change, a major drought would have happened at some point. Same with migration. We know that the number of climate refugees is 0 because the definition of refugee for now does not include climate or environment reasons. We also know that migration is a typical human condition, the key being to give people migration choices while trying to avoid forced migration. For climate change, again, heat humidity is a big one. This may force people to become climate change migrants. Conversely, sea level rise and ocean acidification are possibilities to take out a lot of settlements, but there are so many nuances and provisos in the science that it's not clear that mass forced migration must happen because of changes to the ocean. So we hear numbers 200 million and 1 billion, and I can assure you those are bogus. I have a lot of work done on that. And no one forced to move because of a cyclone or a drought is a climate change migrant, because storms and droughts are weather, but the disaster does not come from the weather. So overall, the science tells us that there are some reasons why climate change is important for humanitarian shelter and settlements, mainly heat, humidity, and this is where we have to be scared. This is terrifying. But we must be wary of other exaggerations and misapprehensions, instead staying with the basic science while avoiding the rhetoric, the buzz phrases, and the errors which are often promoted. In contrast, the populism of climate change means that it can bring in donations and project funding. And we were talking earlier about the UK cuts in aid, but yet climate change remains one priority within the UK. This means that no matter what the science says, climate change does become important for humanitarian shelter and settlements because it keeps us helping the people who are in most need of help. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ilan, for some thought-provoking and clear analysis there. And I think very timely, that the Global Shelter Cluster is also going to have a focus on sustainability and environment in the coming years. So some good connections to be made there, I hope. With that, I will pass on to the GCRF Self-Recovery from Humanitarian Crisis research team, Emma Weinstein-Sheffield and Suzanne Sargent, to give an update on that.
Hi everyone. Tom, could you move to the next slide, please? Thanks. So first of all, thanks so much to the organisers and to the other presenters. It's been a really informative day so far. So my name is Emma Weinstein-Sheffield from Care International UK. I work as the research assistant for the Self-Recovery from Humanitarian Crisis research project led by Oxford Brookes University in collaboration with Care International UK and the partners listed on the slide. I'll be sharing a 5-minute update on some of our project activities, and then Suzanne Sargent from the British Geological Survey will follow with a presentation on the work that BGS are doing as part of this research project. Next slide, please. So in the interest of time, I'll just be highlighting a few of our project activities, and I'll start with some context. So in October 2019, the team was awarded its 3rd grant from the Global Challenges Research Fund to build directly upon research gathered in the 2 previous awards, which spanned from 2016 to 2018, and which gathered learnings from fieldwork in Nepal and the Philippines. This earlier work led to the formation of the Global Shelter Clusters Promoting Safer Building Working Group and the Informing Choice for Better Shelter Protocol. So over the course of this round of funding, project activities have focused on better understanding how shelter self-recovery works and to develop guidance and tools to help operational agencies support this process. So a key output from this project will be guidance to support self-recovery, and this guidance really hopes to target practitioners and donors and draws on learnings from the Promoting Safer Building Working Group workshops hosted last year on context analysis, implementation, and meal in shelter self-recovery. Alongside this, Care UK is conducting fieldwork in Vanuatu in partnership with the Care Country Office to investigate the lived experience of self-recovery and how approaches supporting this process have evolved since the shelter response to Tropical Cyclone Pam in 2015. CARE UK and Oxford Brookes University, with inputs from other project partners, are writing a working paper which will tell the story of how shelter self-recovery discourse has developed, and to really make the case for its effectiveness in emergencies, as well as its contribution to development. Next, a technical working group has been established in Malawi to test, adapt, and refine the protocol for informing choice for better shelter, which is a tool for supporting shelter self-recovery. This process is being led by the PSB working group. Habitat for Humanity are developing their pre-disaster market assessment tool through fieldwork in Lebanon in order to improve disaster preparedness in a variety of contexts. And lastly, Catholic Relief Services are designing a study in Malawi to analyse the impact of their past response to flooding in 2015 and how communities without support replicated building designs. So there's a lot going on despite COVID restrictions of the past year, and much more that I don't have time to mention, but hopefully this gives you a brief overview of what some of the project partners have been working on. Next slide, please. So one big strand of our research focuses on the connections between shelter and health. Last May, we hosted our first multi-sectoral virtual shelter and health event, and this May, we are hosting our second event, which focuses on shelter and mental health. If you'd like some background, then please read the report from the previous event. I can see it in the chat. The upcoming event will be strongly practice-focused and will share case studies from throughout the program cycle, including monitoring and evaluation, and how mental health can be better integrated into shelter and settlements programming. We will be joined by speakers and moderators from the Norwegian Refugee Council, Catholic Relief Services, IOM, and others from the fields of humanitarian shelter, from health, and from development. So please register, and please do get in touch if you would like to share a case study. We'd be really delighted to see you all there. That's all from me. Thanks so much for the time, and I'll pass over to my colleague Suzanne at BGS.
Thanks, Emma. Hi everyone, my name's Suzanne Sargent from the British Geological Survey. I'm a seismologist, and I'm going to just tell you a bit about the geoscience aspects of the self-recovery work that's been done so far. A small team of geoscientists, me and a couple of geologists, have been working with the wider self-recovery team, many of whom I think are at the meeting today, to try and better understand the influence of the physical environment on self-recovery. I think this is something that we wouldn't have been able to really explore in anywhere near the depth we have been able to without being part of a team that includes disaster researchers, shelter practitioners, social scientists, and engineers. It's been incredibly valuable for us. Just to say, geoscience is a term that I think is used more often these days. It covers a wide range of disciplines that investigate the physical environment, the study of earth processes, including hazards, soil, water, mineral and energy resources, and climate change. So it really covers a very broad range of subjects. This figure here, which was prepared by one of the researchers in the first self-recovery project, I think is brilliant at illustrating the diversity of ways in which the different disciplines see the same picture and the real benefit that comes from us working together and sharing and learning from each other. Next slide, please. So many of you will probably be already familiar with some of the earlier self-recovery work. We went out in multidisciplinary teams to communities who were affected by typhoons Haiyan and Haima in the Philippines and the Gorkha earthquake and its aftershocks in Nepal. One of the things that was really important for the geoscientists in the group was that the communities that we visited were in a range of different physical environments. So that might have been coastal regions, floodplains, or more mountainous landscapes, so that we could try and get a handle on how the physical environment was affecting self-recovery. The maps on the right there that you can see, I don't know if it's too tiny, but the colouring really shows the It's coloured according to elevation. So the lower level land is green and it shades up towards brown and then towards white as you get to the higher topographies. In the Philippines, we visited rural and urban communities in a range of settings, as I've said, and these are the kinds of main things that we learned while we were there, both from the people that we spoke to, but also by observing the landscape. And one of the things that I should say, again, a benefit of working with multiple disciplines is that we were exposed to tools and ways of collecting information and engaging with people that we wouldn't necessarily have used in a more traditional geoscience project, if you like. So these communities are living in multi-hazard environments and they have a really good awareness of their environment, the hazards in it, and their perception of the frequency of events had been influencing rebuilding. We found, and this just, I should say that the field work was in 2017 and 2018, so it was a little while ago now, but we saw that damage to roads and bridges caused by relatively small magnitude, but frequently occurring hazard events like floods and landslides was really affecting recovery, with some engineering interventions making it worse. And access to water was a huge issue. Next slide, please. So we took a similar approach in Nepal, where we visited communities that had been affected by the Gorkha earthquake and its aftershocks, again in a range of settings, but going from sort of more lowland areas to fairly mountainous terrains. Again, these communities are living in dynamic environments and exposed to multiple hazards. And those hazards were having a significant effect on infrastructure, particularly on roads, and also on water supply, and that was having a big impact on their recovery. People that we spoke to had lost confidence in their environment, and that was influencing the decisions that they were making. And there was definitely a sense that there was a lack of information, scientific and technical information on the ground in the community about things that were happening on the ground. So for example, the development of ground cracks, and that information being available at the right time. Next slide, please. So recognizing that this is a fairly limited piece of research, and I think it needs to be extended, and we need to look at other disaster settings, we did identify some common geo-barriers to self-recovery. So first of all, I should say that, of course, these aren't going to be the main barriers to somebody to self-recovery. We're not saying they're the most important, but from the perspective of the physical environment and its influence, I think these are the big ones. So the first one is the occurrence of frequent, relatively localized hazards and their impact. The second one then is the disruption to transport infrastructure and access routes as a result of those hazards. The third one was challenges relating to natural water supply. So either being limited capacity to deal with effects of dry spells or seasonal episodes of extreme precipitation, or indeed disruption to water supply as a result of the changing landscape. And all of this was further complicated by the need to make risk-informed decisions, but with potentially relatively limited information that didn't necessarily complement community knowledge and expertise. Next slide, please. So what we tried to do was come up with a preliminary conceptual model about how the humanitarian sector might be able to support people in these dynamic multi-hazard landscapes. So we classified that as direct support, so that's towards the bottom of the diagram, and that's more in terms of scientific and technical information, and then accompaniment, so support, encouragement, advice, so that people are able to use that information. I should say that a really critical factor here is that any technical information needs to be provided at the right scale and in a way that, at the right time, and in a way that complements people's knowledge. Then indirect support was much more about actually just really practical stuff like restoring disrupted infrastructure, water supply and stabilizing slopes, that kind of thing, literally creating an environment that enables recovery to happen. Could you click, please? So in order to provide this support, it really does require that significant capacity, information and logistical challenges need to be better understood and overcome, both from a geoscience perspective, but also from a humanitarian one. And this relates to the availability of geoscience expertise, availability and accessibility of technical information at appropriate scale, and relatively weak links between the geoscience and humanitarian communities. Next slide, please. And so as a kind of first step towards strengthening links between geoscience and humanitarian shelter, as part of the the current GCRF project, Beth Simons and I organised a workshop last year on exploring linkages between geoscience and humanitarian shelter. I can share a copy of that report after I finished speaking. But what we did was we had a group of geoscientists and humanitarian shelter practitioners come together to discuss how we might, how we currently find each other, if you like, and what the challenges were to working together and interacting, and how we might address those. So if you could click, please. So the group came up with a range of topics that connect, or challenges that really need to be understood and overcome, relating to communicating hazard, risk and uncertainty, communicating with each other, really getting beyond the technical language that each community uses, connecting with local geoscientists who are often perhaps hidden and poorly resourced, but nonetheless a really important source of information, incompatible funding models that perhaps actually stand in the way sometimes, the need or I guess the difficulty in doing multidisciplinarity well, the challenges that are there and the need to do a lot of investing in relationships for that to work, availability of data, again, at the right scale, at the right time, and from some of the geoscientists' perspective, potential limitations about some of the rules of thumb used in shelter. Could you click again, please? Thank you. And so the group also came up with a range of possible ways forward. So for example, looking at existing shelter tools through a geoscience lens, enhancing humanitarian shelter practice. If you go to the report, you'll find more detail on this, but examples include bringing geoscience into participatory mapping processes, exploring how physical environment or hazards could be brought into area-based approaches. Then equally, geoscience practice could definitely be enhanced to help too. So this might include building an understanding of how the humanitarian response system works and what information might be needed, and also exploring opportunities for geoscientists to provide input to a response. So next slide, please. So as part of that workshop, we started an informal group, and I think of the people that were there, so geoscientists and humanitarian practitioners, I think it would be brilliant to continue that, because I think there's definitely a need to strengthen those links, and I think there's a huge amount that we can learn from being more closely connected. So if you would like to join this embryo network, then please contact me. My email address is here, and also please contact me if you have any questions. But for now, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emma and Suzanne. We will go straight on to a presentation from related to the same project from Lorenza and Dinah from CRS. If you are there. Lorenza, are you there?
Hi.
Hello.
Thank you for the opportunity. Lorenza is around. She will co-present.
Good.
Myself.
Apologies. I have the wrong name on the slide, although the correct name on the agenda. Apologies for that.
In fact, in the first place, she was the one who had to present, but she is currently engaged in other activities. So I'm coming in because we work hand in hand with myself. Right. I am Madagascar from Catholic Relief Services, based station in Malawi, where I'm working as a shelter technical advisor.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm sorry, I just wanted to say hello. I'm Lorenza Skinka from CRS as well. I had some issues with my connectivity, but I'm here. Carry on, Mada, please.
Thank you. I'll be taking you through on this presentation, especially the first part, where Lorenzo on the last part, she'll come in and we'll do the presentation. Next slide, please. Thank you. On the background about shelter in Malawi, it first started around 2015 when Malawi experienced floods, where around 230 families were displaced. This attracted the attention from a lot of agencies, which responded. Some responded with food items, some non-food items. But CRS was interested much to see on the issue to do with displacement and on the shelter. They invaded the communities where they tried to find out about what are the causes that makes the shelters to collapse, and those still standing in the community were a lesson to them to pick some features. The team found out that the issue to do with the collapsing of the shelters came much because of the techniques which were employed when constructing the shelters. The construction technique was a major cause, and the positives which made the standing shelters were recorded for learning purpose. A response of 898 shelters was done, which just represented a 0.4%, which is very little if you compare to the affected families. This had brought an idea where the approach should be much on the self-recovery, so that the techniques should be passed to the communities, where the communities should be able to build on themselves. After building those 898 shelters, in 2019, the cyclone Idai again hit southern part of Malawi, where Zomba, Palombe, and the lower Shile of Malawi, they were much affected. Learning from the past, it was found that all those shelters which were built in 2015 by the self-recovery project, they were still standing. Some few amendments were made to the design for the design still to be standing, and the 2019 and in 2019, CRS responded with 34,796 households, responded with 1,075 shelters, which was 3% of the 34,796. Still more, now this time around, we are trying to move where we are mainly focused on the self-recovery as the approach, so that the communities should be able to drone themselves. So the next slide, please. The major approach, as I've already explained, is much on the self-recovery, where we impart the knowledge to the masons so that they should be constructing the houses within the communities. These masons are identified within the community where the areas which are risk to floods, so that they should also be applying the history as they are working on it. The use of affordable materials and those locally available is promoted, as some of the affected families cannot afford the expensive materials. As the area said, it's much about the technique which makes the shelter strong, not much of the materials. Yes, materials may come in, but if the technique is poor, still more it will go off. We talk of the IC production, found it as a process. We emphasize much on the DRR key features as we enforce the knowledge of the community. Much of it is about learning from the tradition, as we not to bring something new to the community. Next slide. The community engagements found to be the best solution to the construction techniques. As I already said, we build much on what they are really doing, so that it's easy for them to adopt that thing, unlike bringing something new, which might not be easy to cope with. The production and update of the ICs, we base much on the feedback which the community gives to the program as we roll out the program. Next slide. After building the houses in 2015, those which are still standing, and responding again in 2019 with the cyclone Idai, CRS found it good to go and find out about the evidence. We visited one of the districts which we built the houses, which is Palombe, where we found that 105 people replicated the shelter. And 88% responded to have replicated due to the strength and the resilience of the shelter. As you can see on the statistics, we have 8% which responded as a one-bedroom shelter. It means they incorporated the key features of the DRR to the shelter, but what they managed was to construct a one-bedroom shelter. 59% did with 2 bedrooms, and 33% did with 3 bedrooms. Next slide. The training and the manuals are key to the replication, as the community is able to focus much, and the tool is used as a guide to the community as they are replicating. The community change in perception, permanent resilience shelters, and use of local materials is also found to be key, as it is those materials are affordable to the community, and the community are able to use them with the knowledge we impart to them. We also found out that the certification and the graduation of artisans, where we also market them during the event to the community, has been a key, which, like recently, where we responded in Lower Shire, it was found that the masons which we worked with on the program, they are all employed, which is also another part as empowering them economically. Involvement of local leaders also facilitates sustainability and construction, because they have a role in the community where they enforce the bylaws in the community. Next slide. On the replication factors, Lorenza might come in to take us from here and explain much about the extended impact report.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so we're including this kind of like the learning side of things, just to pinpoint that this approach and this evidence of replication that have been present in Malawi since the first response in 2015 has been captured in these 2 documents, which are the Extending Impact Report in 2015, and eventually there was a practical review in 2018. And next slide, please. So the first report had identified 12 influential behavior change determinants, 12 factors that influence the adoption of hazard-resistant construction techniques, which are the ones you can see on your screen. And eventually the review was able to signal 5 of them as the key factors for replication, which are the ones in green above, which is access to resources, perceived self-efficacy, risk, cues for action, and policy. Next, please.
1 minute left. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So just to say, based on all of this work that we're doing in the field, and also the learning side of it with the reports, we're planning a new research as part of the GCRF research into self-recovery with Oxford Brookes, and we'll be looking at the awareness of housing risks and also the factors that influence influence adoption of DRR components. We'll be doing two surveys. One is a physical assessment and the other one is a household survey. If we go to the next slides very quickly, just we're going to be looking at house design, house construction, health issues, just at the houses that have replicated and the houses that have appeared after projects that can show signs of replication of DRR components. And then in the next one, next slide, in the household survey, we'll be talking to either past beneficiaries and also non-beneficiaries, those who replicated some of these houses, to see what has what influenced their decision-making processes and enable them to replicate. We'll be looking at markets, at livelihoods, at social, cultural factors, and different other health issues and concerns they may have that have driven them to replicate. And I think that's pretty much it. I don't know if there's a last one. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for that fascinating presentation, and really good to hear that so many houses resisted the latest disaster. Vindication for that approach, I think. We go straight on to hearing from Rafik Taleb from the University of Edinburgh about cyclone resistance of wooden houses in Madagascar.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you very much for the opportunity to introduce and talk about our ongoing research project. I'm Rafik Taleb, a structural engineer, basically, and associate researcher at the University of Edinburgh, presenting our project regarding cyclone resilience of traditional wooden houses in Madagascar, especially under climate change conditions. So, as you probably may know, that Madagascar is a country that is most exposed to cyclones in Africa, and one of the most vulnerable countries in the world to the effects of climate change. Next slide, please. Well, Madagascar is usually exposed to those kind of tropical cyclones, and a large proportion of its building stocks were affected by high wind load associated sometimes with floods or landslides. And extreme wind speed measured like a 10-minute sustained speed for cyclones event that was recorded during the last 2 decades was about between like 150 and more than 200 kilometers per hour, so resulting in really severe damage to homes and infrastructure in the country. For instance, I mean, the case of the cyclone Inao in 2017 that struck the northern east part of Madagascar on the morning of March 7 caused at least like 81 deaths and destroyed more than 38,000 houses and left almost to 50,000 people displaced, making a really massive pressure on the humanitarian efforts. And as you can see in the top corner of the map, and that Antalaha community was the hardest hit communities, with its port left inaccessible and more than a third of its homes destroyed or severely damaged. And many of the people who lost their houses were either staying with relatives in more secure places, while thousands of other people were sheltered in schools and gymnasiums. Next slide, please. So those traditional wooden houses makes like more than 85% of the housing stock on the coastal regions of Madagascar. And that's make them very vulnerable to like the high wind loading speed. And that's why we implemented the RC3 project that was established as an interdisciplinary research consortium in the UK, Madagascar, and Kenya, bringing together engineers, climate scientists, and experts in disaster risk management, and trying to understand and address the vulnerability of communities to cyclones in Madagascar. And based on 3 main work packages, that is exposure and sensitivity and adaptive capacity. And the aim of the project is like to characterize the exposure of Madagascar to cyclone and winds under current and climate change conditions, and try to develop some tools, I mean, experimentally and analytical tools to assess the structural capacity of those traditional houses and how they resist the cyclone wind loads. And of course, to assess the current and future capacity of Malagasy society and how to respond and adapt to the impact of those cyclone. And finally, to engage with NGOs and other stakeholders to try to produce some adaptive measures that will increase the resilience of those traditional houses. Next slide, please. So as a first work packages, we were looking into the exposure of Madagascar to cyclonic winds and try to make comparison between the ERA 5 data sets and the measured climate variables from the local weather stations. And as shown in that chart, that the ERA data sets, what it gives very good simulation for the precipitation or temperature variation, but it's really underestimate the wind speed and specifically the wind gusts during the extreme events like cyclones. Next slide, please. So to evaluate the vulnerability of population and traditional houses, we come up with kind of framework on how to measure that. And we were looking to the cyclone damage, the data we collected from the local agencies, and try to estimate the ratio of the affected population and affected houses for specific cyclone events. So that one part, and the other part is to try to review those construction guidelines for specifically for those traditional wooden houses, and trying to identify from an engineering perspective what kind of damage patterns that are driven by the cyclone events, and try to identify what the weakest link on those structural system, and what kind of change that we can come out and try to improve their resilience to cyclone and cyclonic winds. Next slide, please. So, well, no need to look to all those numbers. I mean, just to introduce the methodology that we use to estimate the damage. So we looked for first instance to the district level and tried to analyze data on those numbers of affected peoples, affected houses, and what proportion of collapse, like between total collapse and partial damages. And then after looking to the district level, we zoom in to the municipality level and we try to find out what are the most affected municipalities, and then estimate like the loss and what percentage of the affected population and affected houses, as well as the total collapse of those traditional houses and partial collapse. And usually partial collapse means it's related to the roof damage of houses. Next slide, please. So we use that same methodology to analyze data from several cyclones during the last 2 decades. And what was interesting looking to those data and results is that the damage, I mean, the affected population and affected traditional houses indicates that the very high vulnerability is usually very concentrated in the front coastal regions crossing those cyclone tracks, and quickly reduced when we go through the mainland. Next slide, please. We also look to the construction guidelines and practices in 2016, I mean, the government launched a kind of guidelines on how to make those traditional wooden houses better and more resistant to cyclones, like using the lateral bracing system, and how to make those connections to the roof, and what the foundation scheme or embedment of those columns. But I mean, the fact, it's actually our conclusion up to now is that the practice is far from the expectation of the guidelines. People are just using some, I mean, traditional practices on how to build their houses, and even for reconstruction after a cyclone event. Next slide, please.
So 1 minute left, sorry.
Yes, thank you. So to identify those damages, we collected a lot of photos and tried to identify what are the damage patterns. So basically, I mean, one of the most affecting is the weak connections, specifically for the roof and also for the structural system, as well as that connections represent like 60% of the reasons why those traditional houses fails during cyclones. Next slide, please. So finally, we look to the to the adaptive capacity and try to figure out and have some determinant to measure that adaptive capacity based on data collected from previous projects. That's REBEC project, and also from the literature. And next slide, please. And for each determinant that we agreed to use based on the available data, of course, we have a kind of some indicators that measure that determinant, and that graph shows the difference on adaptive capacity results for the coastal region and highland region. And we could see that mainly half of the indicators are, I mean, really low, so that we can conclude that the adaptive capacity is low in both highland and coastal, but specifically in the coastal region where people use those traditional houses. And on the other hand, in the highland,
sorry, usually, you really need to wrap up now.
And that's the last slide. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Sorry for interrupting, but we're already running 10 minutes late and we need to move on. Thank you. A very interesting looking project. Finally, the last presentation for today is from Richard Luff and Gregory Crawford on, I think, a very important topic and some thought-provoking stuff that we need for Earth Day. So over to Richard and Gregory.
Great, thank you so much, everyone, and thanks for bearing with us. Because session is running late. Fantastic day. So just to introduce myself, Richard Luff and Greg Crawford, we're members of the Realliance Network, and I'll talk more about that shortly. So, like Charles Chuck Setchell, he marked Earth Day. For me, Earth Day is around both Earth care and people care. So it's really poignant that we're doing this session now. This session is really not an information session, though you'll find information in the slides, so that's for you to follow up. This is an advocacy session. This is a call to action for the shelter and settlement sector. What we're calling for here is a biodiversity net gain for healthy settlements. And when we say biodiversity net gain, what we're talking about at its simplest level is really planting of trees, shrubs, planting of plants for food. And this follows up from a session I gave 2 years ago. I call it the Return for Trees for Refugees. Just looking at the image on the left-hand side reminds us that refugee camps and IDP camps are actually mid-term settlements. So we do need to have a longer-term view. The middle image here, it draws from the SDGs. It's target 11.7. This is around providing safe and inclusive green and public spaces, and women and children in particular are highlighted as really benefiting. This is an essential global aspiration through the SDGs. And finally, the image on the right, really, and this is based upon sort of bamboo growth, it really reminds us that stuff grows fast. So when we think of trees, we might think decades, but actually months and years for vegetation to become established. So well within the time frame of camps. Next slide, and I'll hand over to Greg.
Hello, everyone. It's my great pleasure to make the case for biodiversity net gains for health and well-being with Richard. I've been involved with such design work for some time now, and I'm really excited by what we might be able to achieve together. So upticks in health and well-being constitute such tremendous benefit that we should consider them essential to settlement design and management. This is a requirement, not a luxury. Next slide, please. There's a vast amount of research that clearly indicates the ways in which health and well-being drastically improve both mind and body. Contact with nature lowers cortisol levels, blood pressure, and pulse rate, increases creativity, focus, and sleep quality, while also reducing depression, anxiety, higher pain tolerance, and faster recovery from surgery. What we're seeing here is an impact on the entire personal system with consequences that are quite clear beyond the individual. So such improvements promise cascading net gains across sectors. For example, lightening loads for clinics. If people are more healthy to begin with, if they're less stressed to begin with, if they're less likely to be suffering from depression to begin with, clinics and hospital systems will have a lighter load. And this will also, in addition, support better learning for children. So better focus and increased creativity. We're really talking about dramatic increases in the social sector. Next slide, please. And increased contact with nature and biodiversity is one of the most accessible and low-cost strategies to promote health and well-being. And the benefits of nature are manifold. We're deriving food, fodder, medicine, we're regulating temperature, we're filtering air, we can purify water, and we also have great strategies for water storage. And all of these things are really good for the nature that we all depend on. But at the same time, we're benefiting the health and well-being of the individuals in turn. And so I'll pass it back to Richard. Now I just want to end by saying that what we have here is a multiplier effect. By relatively low-hanging fruit, as it were, in terms of strategizing for design and maintenance of settlements, we have tremendous impacts. So simply promoting biodiversity induces improvements that ripple throughout the entirety of a settlement. And that's my 3 slides. So I'll hand it back to Richard now.
Next slide, please. Great, thank you, Greg, brilliant. So on the left-hand side, to remind us that we're really emphasizing in the center of that diagram health and well-being, but there are a number of other co-benefits that are described here too. So it is beyond health and well-being, but we really want to center our attention on this primary objective. I mentioned the organization Realliance. Realliance promotes regenerative approaches to humanitarian and development work, and there's a link there. But just a quote from the website around regenerative development, which really draws inspiration from self-healing and self-organizing. And in terms of how to potentially deliver this, because remember, this is a call to action for shelter and settlement actors, we want to draw from this principle of self-organizing capacities and self-healing, and actually call for those communities affected by crisis to be the ones that lead this process of supporting the biodiversity net gain. And this is really very much around an empowering approach, and it's a delegating approach. It's also a very low cost approach. I've highlighted some costs on the right-hand side of some projects from the information I'd be able to glean, but we think we can get a significant multiplier effect by moving away from an NGO system delivery approach to an empowering regenerative approach. Next slide, please. So finally, I want to really highlight and acknowledge that there's a raft of other work going on, and there are links to various projects that I've been able to find here. The Global Shelter Environmental Working Group exists. UNEP and Mikel, he highlighted the ECHO-funded work that UNHCR under the auspices of the Global Shelter Cluster are leading on. So there is lots of other work out there. I think that probably what's significant is what we're saying here is to center the approach on a health objective with other secondary objectives, number one, and number two, to invoke a regenerative approach. And it's really the shelter and settlement actors, so within the camp coordination, camp management and shelter clusters, that you are the agencies that, if you like, play the lead role in shaping the environment, the settlement environment. So this should be seen very much as a necessity rather than a luxury. I'll end that there. Thank you very much indeed. Handing back to Tom.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, and a really important call to action, I think, there, and I couldn't agree more. With that, I'm going to hand over to Amelia to close.
Hi, everybody. Lovely to have the pleasure of closing such a fantastic day. I hope it's been fruitful for everybody. I hope we've learned a lot. I wanted to say thank you so much for all the supportive messages from the session that we had this morning earlier at 1 o'clock about women in shelter. It really means a lot. And I hope you're all looking forward to tomorrow. So tomorrow we start at 1 o'clock, and we have a new Zoom link, which should be in the Eventbrite information. And there are still some tickets for the morning session, which is with Dr. Chandra Shrestha from the NRA. So I think it would be really fantastic to support that as well. Looking forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Any other last comments, Tom?
Nothing from me. Just thank you everyone for coming, and see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, everybody. Thank you.